Hello everyone, a very good evening and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep. Welcome to another session on internal security. In the last class, we had started with our discussion on the chapter of terrorism. We had covered few basic concepts. So let's continue the discussion today and understand the difference between terrorism and insurgency. We'll also talk about another type of extremism, that is insurrection. These are some key concepts, especially for your mains exam. Because UPSC might ask you a question where you are expected to give out the differences between terrorism and insurgency. Because both are different types of extremism. There does exist a difference between terrorism and insurgency. So let's take a detailed look at this. Let's understand what are the features of terrorism. Let's understand the features of insurgency, and we shall compare the two. And I'll also explain what is insurrection. Once we complete this, then we will take up the two major conflict zones of India, Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir. We'll be discussing the Khalistan movement and as well as the insurgency and terrorism that we have seen in Jammu and Kashmir. So, first, let's start with the features of terrorism. Now, how do you identify an extremist organization, as a terrorist organization? Or how do you label a particular attack as a terror attack? See, terror groups, they operate in a certain manner. They have a certain agenda. They operate in a certain manner. The strategies are devised in a certain manner. So, by observing these features, we can label an organization as a terrorist organization. We can label their acts as acts of terrorism. So, terrorism essentially is an act of mindless violence, an act of mindless violence with the intention of striking fear in the minds of the society, in the minds of the government, and as well as in the media. Terrorism is designed, terror attacks are designed to carry out mindless violence where civilians are also targeted. Not just combatants, not just soldiers and security forces, but even innocent civilians are blatantly targeted by terrorists. That's why we label it mindless violence, which is designed to instill fear, to trigger terror. Right? Terror would essentially refer to fear. By doing this, they are trying to highlight a political agenda or maybe even a religious agenda that these terrorists are fighting for. The terror groups, they do have an agenda. It could be a political agenda or a religious agenda, right? To highlight their cause, to bring up their issue to the forefront. The terrorists design their attacks in such a way that it will be gruesome, it will be repulsive, it will be disgusting, because that is the kind of extreme violence that terrorist groups carry out. They carry out mindless acts of violence. They don't discriminate between soldiers and innocent civilians. They won't distinguish between men, women, and children, right? They'll target anyone in order to instill fear. And by striking fear, they will highlight their political issue or their religious agenda. This is one core aspect of a terrorist outfit. I'm sure many of you would be shocked and surprised by what happened on Saturday. Just Friday, I had mentioned Hamas, right? How different terror groups use terrorism for different purposes. If you guys remember the previous slide, I had mentioned Hamas as an example from Gaza Strip on how it uses terrorism as a warfare tactic. And exactly few hours later, Hamas carried out one of the most deadliest Fidayeen attacks targeted against Israel. Right? I'm sure all of you would be aware of this. It has been dominating headlines around the world. So you've seen the kind of attack that happened in Israel, where multiple terrorists infiltrated into Israel. They fired thousands of rockets and they went across cities and towns, hunting people, innocent people, house by house. They have taken several hostages. They have killed as many people as possible, and they have kidnapped even women and children and old people as well. right? So the very act is gruesome, it's brutal. Such ruthless acts of violence, right, which are designed to instill fear, designed to attract attention, those acts of violence and extremism are labeled as terrorism. No matter what is the cause, no matter what you're fighting for, no matter what is the past, you cannot justify these acts. There is no way you can justify such mindless violence against innocent people at any cost. Is that clear? In the case of Hamas, right, they might say that we are fighting for Palestine. While Palestine has a right cause, Hamas has no excuse to be conducting such mindless acts of terror, right? This is inhuman. It's a gross human right violation. And these are brutal acts. That is how terrorist groups are. You look at Lashkar-e-Toiba, Al Qaeda, Islamic State. All these are ruthless and brutal organizations, and their terror attacks are designed to commit mindless acts of violence. Their design is to strike fear in your minds so that they occupy your agenda, your discussion, your minds. They can push their agenda into your agenda. They can highlight the agenda they are fighting for, bring it to your discussion room, to your coffee table, into your family rooms, right? The idea is to bring up these issues, bring up their agenda into the forefront and grab maximum attention, as much attention as possible. So, a terrorist outfit, a purely terrorist organization, usually they do not attempt to challenge government forces directly. Is that clear? This is one feature of terrorism. But of course, this is a general discussion. There can be exceptions. In general, a pure terrorist outfit will not openly and directly challenge challenge the government forces. They hit the government forces through surprise. They don't take them on directly. They don't invite an open battle with the government forces. You look at Lashkar-e-Toiba, how it operates. You look at Jaish-e-Mohammed. They do target the Indian government, but they don't invite the government to an open conflict. A direct confrontation is not sought by the terror groups. Rather, they strike at will. They try to carry out these sudden surprise attacks. Same with Hamas as well, right? Hamas, you might think it's targeting government forces, correct? But they're not inviting a direct confrontation. The attack which happened on Saturday as well, right? It was a surprise attack. Now, compare this with what Maoists do. Please make a comparison. Make a comparison between Lashkar-e-Toiba or Hamas and Maoist outfits or Naxals. Naxals, who are insurgents, they are inviting an open battle with the government forces. They're directly challenging the government's authority. Usually, terrorist groups don't do that. Is that clear? They will attack government forces. That is different. They are not inviting an open battle or open confrontation with the government forces. That is one feature of terrorism. They rely on these surprise attacks where they strike at will when they want. When they want to bring up some issue to the forefront, that is when they will strike and carry out attacks, be it against civilians or against government forces. The other important feature of terrorism is that these acts of extreme violence is designed to grab maximum attention. Terrorists are attention seekers. Without attention of the public, government, and the media, the terror attack is a failed attack. If no one pays attention to it, the terror attack doesn't serve any purpose. The true intention of a terror attack is to grab maximum eyeballs. And that is why terrorists, they put a lot of effort into planning and they try to execute sophisticated, complex, spectacular attacks. Why do you think Al Qaeda went to the extent of hijacking multiple aircrafts and flying them like missiles into key buildings in the US? Why put in that effort? Why do you think Lashkar-e-Toiba infiltrated Mumbai through the sea route and carried out a Fidayeen style attack on 26/11 in 2008? Why do you think Hamas fired thousands of rockets and infiltrated hundreds of terrorists into Israel and went on a shooting rampage? There are other ways, simpler ways of carrying out these attacks, right? They could have simply just fired the rockets or placed bombs But why do they go to this extent to take hostages, to create a complete hype around the incident? The reason is they are looking for publicity. Without publicity, terrorism serves no purpose. The true purpose of terrorism is to bring out their agendas, their political, religious agenda, and this can be done only by striking fear. And fear can be established in the society, in the minds of the government and media as well, by grabbing the attention, by taking everyone by surprise, by creating chaos. So that is the reason why terrorists, they carefully choose their targets. They choose high value targets. Have you ever heard of Jaish-e-Mohammed carrying out an attack in some remote forest? Right? They don't do that. They look for high profile targets. They attack the Parliament of India. They've attacked military bases of India. Why put in that effort? Why take that kind of risk when they can carry out simpler attacks? The reason is simple attacks will not get you attention, right? The more sophisticated the attack, the more serious the attack, and higher the value of the target, they are going to get maximum attention, right? So if you look at 9/11 attacks as an example, right? Al Qaeda chose very important buildings that represents America, right? Why crash into World Trade Center? Why strike the Pentagon? Same with 26/11 Mumbai attacks. If you look at how the attackers went through Mumbai, they targeted five-star hotels. They were looking for foreign passport holders. They targeted a Jewish prayer house. They targeted a railway station, a very busy, crowded railway station. Why put in that effort and take the risk when they can carry out simpler attacks, right? So terrorists, they take this risk. They put in that effort. They take that extra effort to carefully choose their target, and they always go behind high value targets. That's why they try to attack government buildings, key government buildings, strategic facilities, or crowded places, right? They choose their targets very, very carefully. That is when maximum attention is guaranteed from the media. Now, you tell me, in newspapers, you've been reading newspapers from such a long time. All right. Let's say there is a small explosion in Mumbai. In a crowded place, there is a small explosion. One person is injured. In a remote forest in Dantewad, there is a Naxal attack, and around 10 soldiers have been killed. Now, which attack do you think will be on the front page, grabbing more attention? Clearly, it is the first one. An attack on Mumbai, even though it's a minor attack where no one has even been killed, right, will grab more attention compared to some attack happening in a remote area. That is one core difference you find between insurgents and terrorists. Terrorists are looking for attention. They want to strike fear. They want to establish their presence to bring up their issues, their agenda that they're fighting for. So that is why they carefully choose the target. They plan their attacks in such a way that it becomes a spectacular attack, something you have never heard of, something which is unprecedented. They strike fear by showing that they can strike anywhere at any time. This is where the fear factor lies, right? The public, the government, the media, we will pay more attention to the incident, right? When we feel that the attack took us by surprise, it could happen anywhere, it could happen to any one of us. So this is the USP of a terror attack and a terrorist organization. These are some classic features of terrorist outfits. They choose their targets very carefully. They go for symbolic targets. They try to attack on important dates or maybe festivals. That they'll target religious places, right? The whole idea is to grab attention and strike fear. And the effectiveness of a terror attack lies in the fact that government, the public, and the media, they are going to overreact. This is the true effectiveness of a terrorist attack. The terror attack itself is not the final objective of these terrorists. The terror attack is designed to trigger It's designed to push you, provoke you, motivate you, so that governments and the public and the media, they overreact. When you overreact, you're likely to make the wrong decisions. You're likely to make hot-headed decisions which will actually serve the purpose of the terrorists, because that will bring their issue to the forefront. Now you take Pulwama attacks, or the Balkot airstrikes that India carried out after the Pulwama attacks, right? The Pulwama attacks were designed to provoke the people, provoke the government. If 40 Indian soldiers are killed by a suicide bomber, it is bound to trigger passions. People are going to call for revenge. The media is going to explore this issue and publicize this issue, which will bring a lot of public and media pressure on the government. And governments which become a little defensive following an attack, they try to overcompensate. They become overreactive to show that they are strong. All right. Now look at Israel's response as well. Of course, Israel has every right to retaliate and defend itself. But as an academic discussion, I'm trying to show you the analysis. Governments become more proactive when there is a very serious incident which has happened, right? If people are panicking and if there is complete media attention on this incident, governments are forced to come out and make a strong statement, just to at least show for the public, to show the world that they're strong, they can retaliate, they will take some action. It is this reaction of the government, the public, and the media that the terrorists look for. This is where their success lies. The moment you do that, in a way, you're serving their agenda. Correct? Now, you take the latest attack in Israel. The Palestine issue was slowly dying out over a period of time. Even Saudi Arabia and Israel were about to strike a deal. So, with this major incident, with one incident, Palestine agenda is back on the table, and it could change the very dynamics of West Asian geopolitics, because governments are overreacting. They will, and that is how it works. It's understandable. I mean, it's human nature. Obviously, when you lose your loved ones, when innocents are killed, your blood will boil, you'll call for revenge, right? Governments will try to show that they are strong. And this is what you see following a terror incident. The US went to a war against Afghanistan following the 9/11 attacks, right? So, this is where the true effectiveness of terrorist attacks lie. With minimal effort, they can trigger a overreaction that could drain our resources, because the cost of war is very, very high, right? In the immediate aftermath of a terror attack, it might seem like an attractive option to go to war and punish the perpetrators. But in the long run, if you take a long term perspective, if you look at the consequences, right, the losses are going to be severe. Financial and the human cost would be severe. But of course, that does not mean that you need not retaliate. Of course, every government has the right to retaliate. And that is how you send the right message to the terrorists as well, right? You impose a cost on them as well. But I'm just trying to present the other side of the story, other side of the picture. So the effectiveness of terrorist attack lies in the reaction that they draw from the public, the government, and the media. They will overreact when the target is more high profile, when the attack is more sophisticated, and when more people are killed, especially more civilians are killed. So that is why they engage in mindless violence, brutal violence, and they try to kill as many people as possible. They accept no limitations. They have no limitations at all. They set no boundaries for themselves. They're not bound by ethics, morality. They're not bound by any international law or convention. They show no empathy to anyone, right? They might kill people of their own community. They might kill old people, young children, women, right? They'll not distinguish. They'll not even distinguish between security forces and civilians. All they want is more deaths and injuries, as much violence as possible, so they can grab the maximum attention. This is a classic feature of terrorism. Usually, they do not attempt to control territory. Pure terrorist outfits, usually, they don't look to control territory. They don't look to form the future government. Usually, there are exceptions, of course. All right, like ISIS, Islamic State. is an exception. Islamic State, even though it's a terrorist organization, it sought territorial control. It even captured large amount of territory and established its so-called caliphate. Hamas seeks territorial control. Hamas wants to liberate Palestine, and it aims to even form the future state, the future government. Right? Another example would be the Taliban. The Afghan Taliban has always sought territorial control to form the future government. But these are exceptions. Very few terrorist outfits seek territorial control and they seek to form the future government or the administration. In general, terrorists don't seek territorial control and they don't seek to form the future state. Like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Lashkar, or even Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, all these groups, they say that they're fighting for the Kashmir cause. They want to help liberate Kashmir from India. They have never said that we'll occupy Kashmir for ourselves and form the future government. Understood? Whereas ISIS has been very clear that we will capture territory, we'll establish this so-called caliphate. Hamas and Taliban have been clear. Their political aims are very clear. They are territorial, but these are few exceptions. But in general, a terrorist outfit will not seek territorial control or they don't seek to form the future government. Their only purpose is to carry out brutal violence, kill as many people as possible, and grab attention. Is that clear? By doing that, they strike fear in your minds and they highlight their agenda. They bring their issue to the forefront. So this is what distinguishes a terrorist outfit. All right. So there are many examples, the 9/11 attacks, the 26/11 attacks, the list goes on. India especially has been one of the biggest victims of terrorism, right? Especially state-sponsored terrorism has been the biggest concern for India. Be it IC-814 hijacking, then the parliament attacks, the recent series of attacks against our military installations like Uri attacks, Pathankot, and Pulwama, right? We have seen a number of attacks against India. There are many, many examples around the world. The Munich Olympics attack in 1972, where Israeli athletes were targeted by Palestinian terrorists, right? Palestinian terror outfits, they targeted Israeli athletes. They kidnapped them, held them hostage as well. So that's an example of a terror incident. So any such hostage situation, brutal bombing, shooting incidents, and even brutal torture which is committed, right? They all come under acts of terrorism and governments deal with them accordingly. Is that clear? So India has been one of the biggest victims of such terror incidents, starting right from 1993 till date. We are suffering terror incidents across the country, across Indian cities, in the conflict zones, right? We have been seeing terror attacks from a much longer time. So these are some basic characteristics of a terror group. This is how you can easily identify whether this organization is a terrorist organization. Now let's see what are the features of insurgency. You'll notice the difference. Now, this is something I can go through very quickly because you have already studied Naxalism. We have studied Maoism in the last two classes. You already know the Maoist doctrine. You know the features of Maoism. Exactly the same applies here. Because Maoists technically are insurgents. Even Northeast groups, the Northeast rebels, are actually insurgents. Academically speaking, technically, based on how they operate and how they function, how they are structured, you can tell that they are insurgents. But Government of India has chosen to label all the insurgent groups as well as terrorist organizations. So the definition of terrorism is obviously subjective, as I told you the other day. In the case of India, we'll go by what the Government of India is telling us. So if the Indian government has designated a group as a terrorist group under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, all those organizations become terrorist organizations for us. That's for the examination point of view. But academically, right, if you look at the subject of internal security and counterterrorism, there is a difference between terrorism and insurgency. All right. So Naxals, that is Maoists, Northeast rebel groups, they're all technically insurgent outfits, not exactly terrorist organizations. Whereas the Pakistan-sponsored groups, the Khalistan outfits, the Kashmir outfits, most of them, they are terrorist organizations. In case of Kashmir, we did have few separatist insurgent groups as well, quite similar to the Northeast insurgents. But India has chosen to label all these groups as terrorist outfits. Given the threat they pose to our country, to the integrity, sovereignty of the nation, and the stability of the country, and given the fact that they all conduct mindless violence, the government has chosen to designate all the groups, even insurgent groups, as terrorist organizations. Is that clear? So, insurgency, on the other hand, is a more organized rebellion against the state. There is a direct challenge to the state's authority. There is a direct challenge to the state's authority where the insurgents are openly inviting for a confrontation with the state. They have a very clearly set political aim, which is to overthrow the state through an armed conflict, to overthrow the state and to capture state power. Insurgents are very, very clear. They want to throw the state out and capture state power and form the future government. Whereas you don't see this feature in terror groups in general. As I told you, terror groups are not territorial. They don't seek political administrative control. Whereas insurgents, they are more organized than terrorists. They believe in a more structured mass rebellion. They rely on mass support. Whereas terror groups, they may not have mass support. Just a few hundred or few thousand radicals can form a terror group. But insurgencies will have a larger backing of the masses. You look at Naxals, for example, look at Northeast rebels. They actually have larger support base from the locals compared to your regular terrorist outfits. So they are aiming for a mass organized rebellion. They are directly challenging and confronting the state and its authority. And through the armed rebellion, they want to throw the state out and capture state power for themselves, meaning they want to form the future government. Right? We studied this principles under Maoist doctrine. The same applies over here. They are looking to control territory and they work in a very, very organized manner to achieve their goal. And even if it takes a very long time, they're ready for a protracted conflict. Is that clear? They're ready for long-term goals. They're not aiming for immediate results in few years or few decades. They're ready for a protracted war. That's exactly what Maoists do as well, right? Now look at Naga insurgency, for example. Naga insurgency started in 1947, even before India became independent. And it continues even today, almost 75 years plus. Right? Maoist movement started in 1967 and continues to thrive even today. The reason why insurgent movements sustain more is because their core philosophy is different. They're ready for a protracted conflict. They're more patient compared to terrorists in that regard. And they are more organized, more structured. Terror groups are loosely built. They are very loosely structured. Whereas insurgents are very clearly structured. There's an organizational hierarchy. When discussing Naxalism, I told you that the Naxal groups, they have a clear structure within their organization. There will be a Politburo committee to make all the key decisions. There will be a separate armed wing, a separate branch for intelligence, separate branch for propaganda, separate branch for raising finances, right? So they basically replicate your government machinery. They try to create a parallel government. Terrorists don't do that. Terrorists will have few leaders and commanders, but they don't have such cadre level organization and such structuring you can't find in a terror outfit. But in insurgent groups, you find a clear structure in their organization. They try to mimic or replicate the government machinery because they have to prove to the people that they have the ability to form the future government. Especially, they have to prove to the locals who are supporting them, whom they have brainwashed and indoctrinated. They have to show them that they can form the future government and provide for better administration. So, since they are seeking power, they will also crave recognition. They are more conscious about their image compared to terrorists. Terrorists don't care about what others think of them. That's why they have no limitations. For terrorists, more brutal the attack, the better. But insurgents are not like that. Since they want to form the future government, they have to be a little more mindful. Tomorrow, even if they overthrow the state and capture state power, nobody will recognize them. Nobody will deal with them if they are brutal. So that is why they abide by certain norms. They abide by some principles. They abide with some basic ethics and norms, and they try to refrain from sporadic violence. Is that clear? Whereas terrorists don't hesitate at all. Terrorists will even use a child suicide bomber, right? But insurgents are a little more careful about their image. Insurgents, as much as possible, they don't attack the local people, right? If they do that, if they are sporadic in their acts, they will lose the local support. Locals will lose faith in them. So what they do, they carefully build their image. They create parallel governments like structures, organize themselves thoroughly, and project to the world and the local support that they have the ability to form the future state. So they want recognition in the future. If they manage to throw the state and capture authority, they want that recognition from others. So as a result, they directly challenge the government, and they usually prefer guerrilla warfare tactics, ambush tactics, and they operate in the core zone. They don't carry out attacks in some random place. The place where they are fighting for, that is where they'll carry out their attacks. It could be forests, it could be remote areas, or it could be a city. Terrorists are not like that. Terrorists go for high value, high profile targets. That's why terrorists look for military targets, government targets, and high value targets. Usually, terror attacks happen in urban areas or at strategic locations. But insurgent attacks are not like that. They happen in some remote forest. You'll not even hear about it. The media will not even pay attention to it because they're not looking for maximum attention, unlike terrorists. They're looking to challenge the government's authority. They're openly posing a challenge, saying that we are gaining mass support, we are going to stage a mass rebellion, and we'll throw the state out. We will form the future administration. That is what they're communicating to the local support members. So this is a straightforward feature of insurgency, right? Like Naxals, Northeast rebels, you find these features in those organizations. So if you compare Lashkar-e-Toiba and Naxals, Jaish-e-Mohammed and Northeast insurgents, you will become very clear about the differences regarding their goals, their strategies, and the method of their operations. Is that clear? Now, let's compare the two. Let's quickly compare the two. Insurgents normally target only combatants. Remember, I told you this point under Naxalism. The prime target of Naxals are the security forces, government buildings, elections, elected officials. Anything that represents the state is their primary target, not civilians. As far as possible, they try to not attack civilians and local people because they don't want to lose their support. Right? They don't want to be seen as a brutal entity because tomorrow no one will give them recognition even if they come to power. So they mainly target the state and anything representing the state. So they target combatants and security forces. Whereas terrorists, as we studied, they will target anyone. They'll target combatants, innocent civilians. They'll not distinguish between anyone. Insurgents are seeking territorial control, whereas usually terrorists don't. Another important difference, right? Insurgents usually, they want territorial control. They want to capture the area, liberate those areas, throw the state and capture the state power. Terrorists don't usually have that objective. Apart from few exceptions, terrorists don't have that agenda to capture territory. They replicate the state machinery, the insurgents, and they try to create the state's hierarchical organization structure. Whereas terrorists don't care about this. Terrorist organizations are loosely built, whereas insurgent groups are very clearly structured. They replicate the state machinery and they have a clear hierarchy. And finally, Insurgents work more openly. They operate quite openly. They will clearly let you know where they are operating, which is their stronghold. Like you can tell, Naxals currently have a stronghold in the Dantewad region, in the Sukma district. Now you can't tell where exactly Lashkar-e-Toiba has a strong presence. Where can they carry out the next attack? You can't tell where Islamic State is going to pull off an attack, right? Because they work more covertly. They don't let their presence to be felt. They operate more secretively. That is another core difference in their methods of operation. Insurgents have to do this. They have to work openly because they can't capture state authority by hiding. By hiding and by operating secretly, they can't challenge the authority of the state. If they are directly confronting the state, they have to challenge them openly and invite an open war, open confrontation. That's why insurgents, they work quite visibly. You know exactly which areas are they controlling, where their stronghold is present. But terrorists don't usually let the presence be felt. They operate as discreetly as possible and as covertly as possible. So these are some primary differences that you find between terrorism and insurgency. So given that it's an important topic, a conceptual topic, I do expect UPSC to ask some question on these lines. UPSC might ask you to draw a comparison between terrorism and insurgency. It might ask you to list out the features of terrorism with examples. So it's always better to be prepared for these topics instead of just focusing on the regular topics which are part of the syllabus, right? So I hope it's clear for everyone as to what is terrorism, what's insurgency, and what are the primary differences. Now let's close this discussion by looking at the last topic here, which is insurrection. Insurrection is another type of extremism. Just like insurgency, terrorism, there is one more type of extremism called insurrection. Now, this term recently gained popularity following few incidents in the US and in Brazil. Some of you might remember when the recent presidential elections happened in the US, Donald Trump, he lost the election and Joe Biden clearly won the mandate. But despite the results being clear, Donald Trump refused to concede defeat. He started spreading fake news that the elections had been manipulated. His right-wing extremist followers, they actually believed that elections had been manipulated, and they tried to disrupt the electoral process by attacking the US Capitol building. The US Capitol, right, which represents the American democracy, was brought under attack when the final steps of the election process was being carried out inside the building. It led to violence. All the right-wing extremists who are followers of Donald Trump had assembled. They attacked the security personnel. They stormed the building trying to disrupt the elections, right? So this was a direct act of insurrection. It led to violence, deaths, and injuries as well. Something similar happened in Brazil later. Brazil also was under a far right-wing leader, Jair Bolsonaro, very controversial leader. So Brazil went to elections and even Jair Bolsonaro refused to concede defeat. He was drawing lessons from his friend, Donald Trump. Both were very good friends, right? In democracies, peaceful transfer of power is the core feature. When leaders don't concede defeat officially, when they don't accept defeat, and upon that, if they spread lies and fake news that elections are rigged, that could have dangerous consequences for the democracy. This is the biggest threat American democracy has faced in many, many decades and centuries, right? It's a result of Donald Trump and the lies he was spreading. The same would happen in Brazil as well, because Jair Bolsonaro claimed that elections had been rigged without any evidence. He refused to give up and he refused to concede defeat. So his extreme right-wing followers, they went on a rampage. They attacked government buildings and tried to disrupt the electoral process, causing major destabilization in Brazil. These acts were labeled by the media as acts of insurrection. Is that clear? That's one reason why the term becomes more important. So what exactly is an insurrection? How is it different from your terrorism or insurgency? See, insurrection can be of different types, but insurrection essentially is a refusal to obey authority. If a group of people, a large group of people, if they rise up and if they target the authority and if they refuse to obey the orders, if they deliberately break the orders and refuse to obey the authority, and if they try to take control from the authority, those acts are acts of insurrection. Is that clear? So insurrection can be both violent, it can turn to violence as it did in US and Brazil, or it could be non-violent as well. Peaceful insurrection is also possible. For example, in our freedom struggle, there were acts of insurrection by our freedom fighters, like the civil disobedience movement, the Swadeshi boycott movement, right? We refused the authority. We refused to follow the British rules. We broke British laws and went against it deliberately. We broke the salt taxation laws, right? By carrying out the Dandi March. We carried out the Quit India movement, even though it was explicitly prohibited by the British. So when you challenge the authority and try to wrest control from the authority and openly stand up against it, that is an act of insurrection. So it could be peaceful, which can be seen as democratic as well, but it can get violent and turn into an extremist act. All right. So there are many more examples you can think of. The Anna Hazare movement for Lokpal bill. This was an example of non-violent insurrection. Then the Iran Revolution of 1979. It's an example of violent insurrection where Shia radical clerics, along with Iranians, they rebelled against the Iranian government, against the Shah of Iran. And this revolution turned extremely violent, and the Shah was thrown out, and Shia radical clerics captured power in Iran. So, Iranian revolution, which turned violent, is an example of violent insurrection. The Arab Spring movement, which spread across Middle East and North Africa in 2011, is another example of violent insurrection. It was a revolutionary pro-democracy movement that spread from Tunisia to Egypt to many other countries, including Syria, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Iran, all these dictatorial countries. They saw an uprising, a pro-democracy uprising. And in many countries, it turned extremely violent. So these are violent acts of insurrection. These are examples of violent acts of insurrection, where orders are deliberately broken. Protesters will stand up and wrest authority from the state, and they disobey the orders deliberately. Is that clear? So it could be non-violent as well, as we saw during our freedom struggle and the Anna Hazare movement as well. So all these are different examples of insurrection. So it is indeed seen as an extremist act, right? That's why I told you extremism has a lot of range within it. Don't assume extremism is terrorism. All right? Don't assume extremism is insurgency. Within extremism, there is a whole range. Just believing in a radical thought is also extremism. Propagating radical ideas is also extremism. Supporting and encouraging acts of extremism is also extremism. Even getting directly involved in violence, which could be terrorism or insurgency or insurrection, is also a type of extremism. That's why I told you at the very beginning, in the first class, that extremism is a very broad term. There's a whole lot of range within it, right? I think now you would have got a better idea regarding what are the different types of extremisms that can exist, right? So with this, I would like to take up some doubts and questions. Any questions you have on the basic concepts, please let me know. After that, we'll start with the next topic, a very big and very important topic. We'll look at the Khalistan movement. We'll look at Punjab, a major conflict zone for India. There is a troubled history, right, that many of you may not be entirely aware of. Maybe now, because of what has happened in the last few months, in the last 1 year, you guys might have got more attention. But in the past, current generation didn't have much of a clue about what is the Khalistan movement, right? Today, you're seeing a possible revival of this dormant Khalistan movement. Back in the 1980s, this was our biggest security threat, bigger than Naxalism, bigger than Northeast insurgency, bigger than even Kashmir insurgency and terrorism. Right? 1980s was a real nightmare for India as far as Punjab and some of the diaspora members were concerned. So we'll discuss the Khalistan movement in detail, but first, let's see some questions and doubts. Any doubts, please let me know. And also SMEs, please push it to the dismiss section. Pratyaksh is asking how Anna Hazare movement was an insurrection. They never disobeyed. See, any act of protest against government orders becomes an insurrection. In the case of Anna Hazare movement, there were prohibitory orders imposed, and still the Lokpal movement went on against the prohibitory orders. Right? So that itself becomes an act of insurrection. Now let's say the government has imposed Section 144. It has prohibited the assembly of more than 4 people, and yet there's a peaceful protest carried out. That is also an act of insurrection, technically speaking. The farmers' protests, right? The Kaveri protests, they all become acts of insurrection. Any disobeyal of authority, any disobeyal of orders from the state becomes an act of insurrection. Abhishek is asking why insurrection and revolt aren't the same. They are pretty much the same. They are synonymous. Synonyms. Insurrection and revolts are pretty much synonymous of each other. Next, any question? Santosh is asking, sir, what's the aim of Northeast insurgents? We'll come to it, don't worry. We have a separate chapter for Northeast insurgency. Shushmit is asking how insurrection is different from insurgency. In insurgency, there is definite violence. There is large-scale violence involved in insurgency, but that's not guaranteed in insurrection, right? In insurgency, there is a clear attempt to throw the government out itself and capture state power, but that's not the case with insurrection. It need not be the case with insurrection. Purvi is asking, according to the government, insurgency and terrorism is the same. No, the government, of course, knows insurgency and terrorism are different. But we recognize all insurgent groups as terrorist groups. Because that way, we can act more strictly against them. We can apply stricter laws against all these groups that are threatening our security and integrity. Right? So all insurgent groups are also designated as terrorist groups. But government does know that insurgency is different from terrorism. Chituri is asking, communal riots come under which type? Communal riots are a law and order situation. They are neither. They are a law and order situation. Priyanshu is asking why terrorists want to grab attention. Terrorists want to grab attention to highlight their political cause. Now, Lashkar-e-Toiba wants to grab attention to bring up the Kashmir issue, to internationalize the Kashmir issue and bring pressure on India. Hamas wants to grab attention to bring up the Palestinian issue, right? To bring forward their political agenda, their religious agenda. Terrorists try to grab attention through their attacks. Sahil is asking, is insurrection wrong or crime? Definitely, see, insurrection would be illegal, right? Anything against the law, if you're breaking the law, it automatically becomes illegal. Arushi is asking, can Taliban be called insurgents? See, this is a tricky area. Academically speaking, if you just look at features of insurgency and terrorism and then try to look at Taliban, Taliban is actually a radical political insurgent outfit. The way they operate, the goals they have, right? Taliban is exactly an insurgent outfit. It's a radical political insurgent outfit. But most countries, especially India, has classified Taliban as a terrorist organization because of the threat it poses, because of how it has nurtured terrorism with Pakistan. right? But many countries, they have negotiated with Taliban, they've struck deals with Taliban because they don't look at Taliban as just a terrorist outfit. They look at Taliban as more of a radical political outfit and a insurgent outfit. Same with Hezbollah in Lebanon, right? Even Hezbollah is seen by many countries as an insurgent organization. But few countries which are threatened directly by Hezbollah, they have classified Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. So this varies depending on which country you're talking about, right? That's why I told you at the very beginning, definition of terrorism is very subjective. How you classify terror groups, which group is designated as a terror group, is subjective, changes from country to country. That's it. Any other questions? Neither, actually. It was a coup attempt. Mohana is referring to the private military contractor of Russia, the Wagner Group, headed by Eugeny Prigozhin. Recently, he led his private militia and marched towards Moscow, stating that he wants to throw out the defense minister and bring out changes in the defense ministry of Russia. This was an act of committing a coup against the government itself, right? So that exactly won't be insurgency or insurrection. It was an attempt to throw the state out and capture power, where the attempt was made by an armed force backed by the state. So that becomes a coup attempt. What measures are taken for dealing with insurrection? The concerned laws will apply. Like we have Indian Penal Code, the CRPC, right? The concerned laws, criminal laws, penal laws, they will apply. Now, let's say government has placed prohibitory orders and still you go out and protest, you'll get arrested. The police will arrest you, they'll detain you and press charges as well because you've broken the law. So, concerned laws, depending on what you've done, will apply. Pratyaksh is asking, can we say insurgency is a type of insurrection? No, you can't. Insurgency and insurrection are clearly different. Insurgency always has an element of violence. Insurrection need not have that. Chandrasekhar is saying, I'm not able to understand the main difference between Naxalism, terrorism, and insurgency. See, we have spent 3 classes in explaining Naxalism, insurgency, and terrorism. But let me try to give you a brief idea. Naxalism is a left wing extremist movement. Technically, it's an insurgent movement in India. It's inspired by the Maoist doctrine, right? Naxals have a goal to throw the state out. They want to capture state power. So they have mobilized support from tribals, farmers, peasants, and workers. Is that clear? Terrorism is an act designed to grab attention, commit mindless violence, and strike fear to highlight political issues and religious agendas. Got it? Naxalism is a type of insurgency. Insurgency is a organized armed rebellion to wrest authority and control from the state and to throw the state out and capture state power to form the future government, like Northeast insurgents, Naxals. So that is the core difference between insurgency and terrorism, and it explains what is Naxalism as well. Balraju is asking, is Bandh or strike an insurrection if it leads to breakdown of law? Right? If the Bandh or strike, which is called, if police have placed prohibitory orders and the protesters break that, then yes, you can technically call it an insurrection. See, in India, we don't use the word insurrection. The media or the government, we don't use that. This is an academic discussion. Academically, yes, all these acts where you break the law, where you violate the orders and protest and stand up against authority, challenge the authority, try to wrest authority from the state, all those acts are acts of insurrection. All right. So, guys, these are some of the questions. Now, let's proceed with the discussion. Let's start with the next topic, a very, very important topic, the Khalistan movement. Here, we need to understand the background. What is the origin of the movement? What's the root cause? How did the movement escalate? Who were supporting this movement? What was the threat posed to India? And how did India deal with the threat? And how did we contain this threat? Because we had almost eliminated this movement. It had become a dormant, dead movement. But now, suddenly, in the last 15 years, from 2010, we are seeing proactive attempts in India and around the world to revive the Khalistan movement. The revival of Khalistan movement is not happening in last few months. Just because you've read it in news, don't think it's happening only in the last few months. The revival attempt is going on from 2010. All right? So this is what we need to study and understand. The Khalistan movement is a radical, extremist, terrorist ideology led by Khalistani outfits. Their goal is to break Punjab away from India, to secede Punjab away from India and establish Punjab as an independent country called Khalistan. Is that clear? So here as well you find a misinterpretation of religion. See, Sikhism is one of the most beautiful, peaceful religions in the world. It's almost on par with Buddhism. Look at the langars in Gurudwaras. Look at the humanitarian work that the Sikh community carries out in India and around the world. It's tremendous, right? It's a beautiful, peaceful religion, a peace-loving people, wonderful people who have contributed tremendously to the country, just like every other community. 95-99% of the Sikhs have no problem with India, right? Majority of them are peaceful. Even in the diaspora, amongst the Sikh diaspora abroad, majority of them are peaceful and they are pro-India. But some elements, some of these extremist elements, right, they have misinterpreted this ideology. They have twisted the ideology of Khalistan, of having a pure land for the Sikhs, and turned this into a violent terrorist movement in modern times. So this movement has no place in India. It's an outright separatist movement. The goal is to break Punjab from India. So it's a threat to our integrity and sovereignty, and there's no way the ideology can be tolerated. And moreover, Khalistan movement has no genuine cause. There is no genuine root cause. Even if you try to justify the Khalistan ideology, you cannot. Because see, in case of Naxalism, we saw that there were some genuine root causes at least. Like genuinely, there was lack of development. There was injustice done to our tribal communities, farmers and peasants. There was lack of governance and administration, which led to backwardness as well. So there was at least some genuine root cause on which Naxalism was built. Right? Of course, that's not a justification for Naxalism, but still, there is some genuine root cause which we need to address to tackle the movement. But in case of Khalistan movement, trust me, there is no genuine root cause. It's not just my personal opinion. This is the opinion of many, many strategic experts. Is that clear? Many experts believe that Khalistan movement has no genuine root cause. It is built on propaganda, built on created perceived sense of injustice. Some of these extremists, they themselves have perceived that injustice has happened to them. And based on that, they have raised this evil movement that threatens to destabilize the country. And the worst impact is that it drives a communal divide, right? Since a communal angle is involved, it divides the two communities, the Sikhs and the Hindus. The two communities which have always thrived together. Majority of them are very friendly to each other. But a communal polarization gets introduced here, driving the two communities apart. Right? So let's see, where does this ideology originate from? Where did this begin? How did this turn into a terrorist movement? To find these answers, you need to go back to colonial India, especially 1940s, when we were about to gain independence. When it was clear that Britain could no longer control the Indian colony, right? The World War had taken a huge hit on Britain. Its administration had collapsed. It had taken a major economic hit as well because of the world wars, and it was a power on the decline. So by 1940-45, it was very evident that Britain is going to decolonize. It's going to grant independence. By then, freedom movements had gained momentum as well in India and around the world. So it was only a matter of time that India would have emerged independent as a result of the freedom struggle. So by 1940s, the freedom struggle had already been communalized. There was a strong communal divide between the two major communities, that is Hindus and the Muslims. The British themselves had encouraged the communalization by backing extremist forces in Hindus and Muslims. They would back the idea of Muslim League and leaders like Jinnah to push for a exclusive communal state called Pakistan, a separate state for Muslims, an exclusive state for Muslims. Right? That was a clear communal partition, a communal agenda of Jinnah and the Muslim League, which was backed by the British. Similarly, they would back Hindutva extremists as well, like Hindu Mahasabha, to try and push India to become a Hindu state. Fortunately, thanks to our founding fathers, thanks to the farsightedness of our freedom fighters, we became a secular nation, a diverse country accepting all faiths, all ideologies. Contrary to what Pakistan became. Pakistan became a theological, inward-looking state. Now, when partition was eventually carried out, right, by that time, partition was the only eventuality because large-scale communal riots had broken out. Throughout 1900s, there were multiple communal riots between Hindus and Muslims triggered by the extremists. So a large-scale communal division had come up between the two major communities, and partition had become the only solution. So eventually, when India-Pakistan were created on communal lines, creation of Pakistan was definitely communal, right? India became secular, but Pakistan's creation was a communal partition. So as the two countries were created, the Sikh community, right, they felt lost. They felt they lost their homeland, they lost their rights, and they also faced the devastating impact of the post-partition violence. The Sikhs, who see Punjab as their homeland, I'm talking about United Punjab, that is the Punjab of India and the Punjab of Pakistan, right? 1940s Punjab. The Sikhs have always seen Punjab from Lahore, Rawalpindi, all the way till Amritsar, right? Going up till even Himachal Pradesh, etc. It was a very big province, the Punjab province. This has been the homeland for the Sikh community, right? So as partition became a reality, right, the Sikh community, they felt that they got caught in between the Hindus and the Muslims. The Sikhs tried raising their voice with the British. They tried to seek a separate state to ensure that Punjab would belong to the Sikh community. Those demands were raised with the British as well prior to partition. Since it had become clear that Pakistan would be created, would be carved out of India, and it would be allowed to become a theological Islamic state, the Sikhs also wanted to have their own homeland, their own state, and some of them, at least some of the Sikh leaders, they weren't comfortable in being part of India or Pakistan. This is understandable. Right now, before independence, before 1947, this demand is totally understandable. Such demands were there from every community, right? From South India, from the various kingdoms in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, even in Northeast India, the kingdom of Travancore, the Nizam of Hyderabad, right? They all had their own demands. Raja Hari Singh of Jammu and Kashmir, they all had their own demands. Nothing wrong with that. Prior to 1947, everyone was looking after their own interests. Every king, every community, right? Every religion, they were all looking after their own interests because that is how the situation was. So it's understandable that the Sikhs, majority of them, they felt lost. They felt they were caught between Hindus and Muslims. Some of the Sikh leaders expressed the demand with the British that they would like to have a separate country, that they would like to keep Punjab united, not to break it apart, and ensure that it becomes the homeland of the Sikh community. But of course, this demand was rejected. If the demand was accepted, similar demands would come up from every part of the country. The only demand accepted was the demand of India and Pakistan. So accordingly, two dominions were created. Right? The partition happened, two dominions were born, and following partition, there was large-scale communal violence. As migration started happening, right? Many people started coming back from Pakistan to India. Many started migrating from India to Pakistan. This was a human tragedy. There was a massive refugee crisis that occurred, and there were very widespread and violent communal riots that broke out between Hindus and Muslims. Right? The extremists on both the sides would unleash brutal violence following the partition, and the Sikhs were caught in between. Even some of the Sikh radicals would get involved in the violence to protect the community. They would attack the other community as well. So towards Punjab, when the communal violence happened following partition, right, apart from Hindus and Muslims, the Sikhs were also caught in this communal violence. So this led some of the Sikh leaders to believe that they never had a future either in Pakistan nor in India. They realized that Pakistan is definitely not an option for them. Pakistan would immediately start purging religious minorities. As soon as Pakistan was created, it immediately adopted a rigid version of Sunni Islam as its state religion, to become a theological state, and it would start targeting religious minorities. Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Christians, even Muslims who don't abide by the Pakistani version of religion, they're all targeted and persecuted in Pakistan. So Sikhs realized that they had no future in Pakistan. There is no way that the community can thrive in Pakistan. It had become a radical theological state. With India as well, even though the community merged with India, most of the Sikhs came back to India as well. Even though India tried to integrate the community and give them equal opportunities, there was a sense that eventually India would be a Hindu majority state. India could be secular. Constitutionally, we are secular. But socially, if you look at the demography, majority of them are Hindus. So some of the Sikh leaders, they had concerns. They were worried what will happen to the community. Will they get equal treatment? Will they get equal rights? So eventually the partition happened and Punjab was broken. Right? A half part of it fell into Pakistan. The other half came into India. Back then, the Punjab province was very large. It included not just the current state of Punjab that you see on the map. It even included Haryana. It included Himachal Pradesh as well. It was such a big province, right? So as soon as independence came and most of the Sikhs came back and migrated back to India, some of the Sikh leaders, some of the Sikh political leaders, some of them were actually slightly radical and too political. They started a socio-cultural movement called the Punjabi Subha movement in 1955 under the leadership of the Akali Dal, right, which is a religious political organization. They started a movement called the Punjabi Subha movement. Akali Dal is a right-wing organization, right? It's a religious political organization. And this outfit started nurturing a radical idea that they should fight for the rights of Sikhs. They should secure more rights to Punjab and the Sikh community. See, demanding rights through democratic methods is different. But raising unnecessary demands when there is no discrimination, when everyone is being treated as equal, and exploiting that politically is a different issue altogether. Akali Dal was primarily interested in the political interests, the electoral interests. Post-independence, Akali Dal leaders, they wanted to ensure they'll win elections all the time. They will not give any space for the Congress. At that point, Congress was the other major party, right? Akali Dal wanted to ensure that Congress will not win elections in Punjab. So based on the pre-independence idea of Khalistan, based on the pre-independence idea of separate state and better rights for the Sikh community, some of these radical elements and political leaders and religious leaders, they started and raised this movement called Punjabi Subha movement in the 1950s, in 1955. The movement itself is not a problem. Through the movement, they express their cultural demands, their political demands. This is absolutely fine. Raising demands is absolutely fine. But the problem was, many of the demands were unreasonable. Some of the demands they raised were unreasonable, which could never be fulfilled by the Indian government. And as India would reject these demands, they would exploit this to project India in bad light, to show that India does not care about the Sikh community, to show that a Hindu India is discriminating against minority Sikhs. This was pure propaganda by Akali Dal leaders and other radical leaders of the Sikh community. Some of them, right? Majority of the members of Sikh community were with India. They had no issues at all, right? Majority of them served Indian armed forces with great pride. They served Indian civil services with great pride. They were contributing to the rise of India, right? They played a critical role in the Green Revolution to make India self-sufficient in food grains. But this was the work of few political extremist elements and religious radical elements who are trying to serve their own electoral political interests. They were the ones who bred the poison, introduced the poisonous idea, and slowly built this agenda over a period of 2 to 3 decades. One of their initial demands, one of the initial demand of Punjabi Subha movement was to reorganize Punjab on linguistic lines and make it exclusive for the Punjabi speakers, and separate the non-Punjabi speaking areas. In polity and modern history, you would have studied about the reorganization of India, the internal reorganization of Indian states. This was one of the primary tasks after India's independence, right? To restructure the provinces and the states and to make them practically administrable units, right? Because some provinces were very large, some princely states and provinces were very small, and there was no logical basis on which the states were divided. So the government of India was facing one of the biggest tasks post independence, which was to reorganize India internally. So several committees were set up. You would have studied these committees as well in polity and history. There was the JVP committee that included Nehru and Sardar Patel as well. Initially, they saw whether language is feasible to create internal administrative divisions, whether linguistic states can be created. But they realized that if language is used, this could become a divide. It could increase divisions and affect our integrity and unity. So they dismissed language as a basis for reorganizing the states. There were other committees as well. They suggested various solutions, but none of them seemed to be working. Finally, the States Reorganization Commission, set up under Fazal Ali, the Fazal Ali Commission, would bring out its final recommendations in 1956, and it determined that language is the only viable basis to reorganize India. It supported the creation of linguistic states. After years of debate, right, almost 9 years of debate and discussions and deliberations, finally it was decided that linguistic division is the only viable option. Because prior to this, in 1953, the first linguistic state of India had been created, which is Andhra. Until then, government of India was hesitant. It was reluctant to create linguistic states because the fear was linguistic division would increase the divisions in the country and affect the unity and integrity of the nation. That's why JVP committee and other committees had rejected language as a basis. But in 1953, when Andhra got created, right, it didn't really threaten the integrity of the nation. If you look at the history of creation of Andhra, a very popular leader, Potti Sriramulu, he went on a hunger protest. He wanted to stand up for the Telugu speaking people, and he demanded that Andhra area should be separated from Madras. The Madras state was a very large state at that point. So to fight for the rights of the Telugu speaking people, the demand raised was a linguistic state. Initially, the government wouldn't accept the demand, but eventually, because of the hunger strike, Potti Sriramulu died. He sacrificed his life. This triggered massive violence in the Telugu speaking areas, very similar to how Telangana got created later. Right? It was a violent struggle that broke out. So to pacify the protesters, the government finally went ahead, carved Andhra out of Madras, and formed the first linguistic state of India. The government later saw that it did not threaten the integrity of the nation. Once the Andhra was created, once it was carved out of Madras, the protest died out, it became very peaceful, and the demand of the Telugu speaking people had been met. So this gave confidence to the government of India that language can be a basis. Linguistic division can be done because it won't really divide the country. It's only a logical basis to create administrative divisions. Doesn't mean the states are exclusive. Now, doesn't mean Andhra is exclusive to Telugu speaking people, right? So based on this logic, Fazal Ali Commission supported linguistic reorganization, and India went about creating linguistic states. That's how all your linguistic states were born, right? Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and many more. But please remember, none of the states are exclusive to a community or to a language. Now, Gujarat is not only for Gujaratis. A Tamilian can go to Gujarat, settle down, he'll have the same rights. Right? Within Gujarat, there is no division of Gujarati speaking areas, non-Gujarati speaking areas. A Maharashtrian will have the same rights in Karnataka. A Kannadiga will have the same rights in Kerala or Tamil Nadu. Right? So language for reorganization is simply a logical basis, nothing else. It will not give you any additional right. Everyone is equal in the country. That's the beauty of the Indian Constitution. But what Punjabi Subha movement demanded was, they wanted Punjab to be exclusive. They wanted Punjabi speaking areas to be separated from non-Punjabi speaking areas. Meaning Punjabi speaking areas would become exclusive, and the problem here was not just the language, it is associated with a religion. See, Punjabi language is spoken by Hindus and Muslims as well in the region. Even in India and Pakistan, even today, in the Punjab region, there are Punjabi Hindus, Punjabi Muslims, Punjabi Sikhs. But the Sikhs are the ones who are primarily associated with the Punjabi language and the Punjabi culture, just like Bengali culture, which is a much broader identity than your religious identity. If separate Punjabi speaking divisions are created, that essentially, inadvertently, it would become a Sikh area. It would become an area for Sikh community primarily, which means it would be another communal division within the country. Is that clear? So there was no way that Prime Minister Nehru would accept this demand. It was outright rejected by India that we cannot create such states. Of course, eventually Punjab was created, but Punjab was not exclusive, right? Just like any other linguistic state, even Punjab was carved out later. But Punjabi Subha movement's demand, Akali Dal's demand, was to make Punjab exclusive and bifurcate the Punjabi speaking areas from non-Punjabi speaking areas. That would give some exclusivity to Punjabi speaking areas, which would be dominated by the Sikh community, which means in an indirect way, it would become a communal division. Right? How could India agree to this after witnessing the horrors of communal partition with Pakistan? Internally, if you start using religion indirectly as a basis, then that would be the real threat for the unity and integrity of the nation. This was an unfair demand. It was an unjustified demand. So this demand was rejected by the government of India, right? Prime Minister Nehru clearly rejected this demand. And as a result, Akali Dal leaders, they started a propaganda on this. Punjabi Subha movement leaders, they started spreading a propaganda that India does not respect Punjabis. India does not respect the Sikh community, that Hindus are discriminating against the Sikhs. These were the lies and the propaganda that was spread to create more support for the movement in the 1950s. So day by day, gradually, support was coming for this movement. It would never become a threat until 1970s, 1980s. In 1950s, nobody was behind this movement, right? Very few radical political elements were behind it. But by carrying out such propaganda over a period of time, they were gradually building up a support base. As you can see, the demand made was unreasonable. The government of India could never have fulfilled it. Creating separate Punjabi speaking areas exclusively for the community would mean the region would become exclusive for the Sikh community. Given the religious connect with Punjabi language, the region would become a communal division, and that can't be a basis for organizing the country internally. Correct? Language was used as a logical basis, but indirectly, religion cannot become a basis for reorganization. That is why the demand was rejected, and this bred resentment amongst the Akali Dal leaders. All right? But this is only one of the causes. There are many more. One alone is not enough to trigger such a big movement, right? So these Akali Dal leaders and the leaders of Punjabi Subha movement, right? They started exploiting this issue, started breeding the ideology of Khalistan, that Sikhs are not going to be protected in India. That was the general idea that they were trying to spread. But following this, based on Fazal Ali Commission's recommendation, based on State Reorganization Commission's recommendation, India went ahead and broke Punjab into three parts. We trifurcated Punjab. Again, purely for administrative reasons, nothing else, no hidden agenda. The agenda was not to harm the Sikh community, not to oppress or discriminate against the Sikh community. Purely for administrative reasons, smaller states made sense. The large Punjab province, which came to India, it was divided into three parts. Today's Punjab, Haryana, and Himachal Pradesh. This angered the Akali Dal. Akali Dal and the leaders of Punjabi Subha movement saw this as a second partition. They first believed half of Punjab was lost to Pakistan, correct? Which is true, which is understandable. But now they believed that India was breaking up Punjab and weakening the homeland of the Sikhs. They opposed the trifurcation at any cost. But this was done purely on administrative grounds. It was convenience, administrative convenience for the government, because Punjab was too large a province. So Haryana and Himachal Pradesh were carved out, and this was rejected by Akali Dal and the right-wing leaders who were part of the Punjabi Subha movement. All right, so that caused the second resentment. The first resentment was with regard to the linguistic reorganization. Second resentment was because of trifurcation of Punjab. And the third resentment came up in 1960s with regard to sharing of waters of Ravi, Bias and Satluj. In 1960, we had signed the Indus Water Treaty with Pakistan to share the waters of the Indus. Indus Water Treaty had been signed with Pakistan, right? So accordingly, the eastern rivers, Ravi, Bias and Satluj, were largely assigned to India. Western rivers were largely allocated to Pakistan. So Indus, Jhelum, Chenab were largely allocated to Pakistan's control. Ravi, Bias, Satluj were largely given under Indian control. Now these rivers are the lifelines of this region. From Himachal Pradesh to Haryana to Punjab, all these regions, the farmers especially, are heavily dependent on these waters. So accordingly, a fair sharing was worked out. Since the waters are critical for all the states here, a fair division was provided, but it was opposed in Punjab by the Akali Dal leaders. Akali Dal and Punjabi Subha movement leaders, they complained that Haryana was getting an unfair share. Punjab was being denied its fair share. This was again a propaganda, not rooted in facts. Then came the question of Chandigarh as well. When Punjab was trifurcated, right, a capital had to be found. With regard to Haryana and Punjab, there was no other alternative. Haryana didn't have any viable city that could become a capital. So with no further choice, the government designated Chandigarh as the joint capital and made it a union territory. But the Akali Dal leaders exclusively wanted Chandigarh to be the capital of Punjab alone. They didn't want to share this with Haryana. So India again had to take this decision due to convenience, nothing else, not to target the community. Chandigarh was designated as the joint capital of Punjab and Haryana and made a union territory, which would bring this under the administration of the center. Now, this was also rejected by Akali Dal, and they started spreading lies and propaganda that India was targeting the Sikh community. India was snatching away the land of the Sikhs, breaking it apart, dividing it again and again, bringing it under central rule. Right? All such propagandas were spread by the political religious leaders of Punjabi Subha movement with direct backing from Akali Dal. So these events of the 1950s and 1960s, this is what served as the source, the origin of the Khalistan ideology. It was based on these perceived injustice that a call was given to create a separate country to break Punjab from India and form Khalistan. This idea had been suggested prior to independence as well, when the British rule was still present, right? When partition was yet to be carried out, the call for Khalistan had been given, not in a violent manner, but just like Pakistan would be born, India would be born. The Sikhs also wanted a separate homeland, and back in the British rule, it was a fair demand, right? So they had proposed the idea of Khalistan, which is mentioned in the sacred books as well of Sikhism, right? Khalistan is this pure land, the sacred land. And the demand was there before 1947, but largely on political grounds. But now, unfair demands were being raised by some radical political elements, primarily to fulfill their own political interests, nothing else. They would breed this sense of resentment and injustice. They would start their propaganda and campaign against India, saying a Hindu India was discriminating against minority Sikhs. As you saw, in all the cases, the decisions of the government was purely driven by administrative convenience, not with the intention to hurt the community or target the community. But some of these leaders, they would twist this, and they believed that this was injustice done to them. They would start propagating that separate state should be formed, that Punjab should break away, that Punjab has no future with India. This was just the root, just the start, just the beginning. Until now, it was no threat to India. It was not a violent movement. It was just a political propaganda which was going on. But in 1970s, we started witnessing a slight escalation. In the 1970s, a clear escalation was noted. Let's see what happened. In the 1970s, a call for a separatist movement was given. The radical Punjabi Subha leaders and Akali Dal leaders, they would openly give a call for Khalistan movement, saying that this should be a separatist movement. They would give a call for a political struggle. But there were no supporters for this. Not enough people were behind this idea. But within the diaspora, as you know, the Sikh community is very well spread out around the world since colonial times. From Canada to Europe, the Sikh diaspora is very well spread out. They were quite influential as well. So in Europe, some of the radical political elements started adding fuel to this fire. The initial fires had been lit, calling for a separatist political movement in India. Some of the members of the diaspora would associate with the ideology, and they would start backing this idea. And Dr. Jagjit Singh Chauhan was one of them. He would revive the idea in Europe. He declared that Khalistan had been formed. He unilaterally declared that Khalistan had become independent. He even launched a so-called flag currency and even tried establishing a so-called parallel government of Khalistan. These are all symbolic. It wasn't that everyone supported this, but it was just a symbolic act. But it did have an impact amongst the diaspora, especially in Europe and also in Canada and in US. Right? This is where the Sikh community was largely found back in those days, in the 60s and 70s. So Jagjit Singh Chauhan would revive this idea of the 1940s, the pre-partition idea of having a holy land, a Sikh land called Khalistan. He would raise a flag as well, declare that it had become independent, introduce a so-called currency, bring out a so-called constitution, and announce that an alternate government had been formed. This symbolic act did play a role in influencing some members of the diaspora abroad. Then within few years, Akali Dal leaders and Punjabi Subha movement leaders, they adopted the Anandpur Sahib resolution. In 1973, the leaders of the Prabandhak committee, the Gurudwara Prabandhak committees, the Shiromani Akali Dal and other major political and religious groups, they met at the sacred Gurudwara, which is Anandpur Sahib. Anandpur Sahib is a very important Gurudwara in Sikhism. They would call for a meeting here, and all these leaders, most of them who were radical elements by now, they gave a call called Anandpur Sahib resolution. They adopted this as a statement. Through this, they raised fresh political demands. They would raise fresh political demands, asking for autonomy, more financial powers, administrative powers. All of them were unreasonable demands again. And the Anandpur Sahib resolution is seen as the precursor to the launch of the Khalistan extremist movement. It would contain very provocative words. It contained very instigating, triggering statements, which indicated that if demands are not met, it would become a violent movement. So Anandpur Sahib resolution, this document, right? In a way, it serves as the agenda, the political agenda of the Khalistan movement even today. Several political cultural demands were raised, and a threat was issued that if the demands are not met, then violence is going to break out. Separatist movement is going to break out. The Indian government rejected the demands, and correctly so. Such demands, unreasonable demands, couldn't be met. And as I told you, there was no genuine root cause. Not once had India discriminated against the Sikhs. Sikhs in general had no complaints about India. There was great communal harmony between Sikhs and Hindus. Rather, the divisions were not even evident between Sikhs and Hindus. We were all part of one country, right? Majority of the Sikhs were in favor of India, but it was some of these political elements, radical elements, who slowly bred this poison, right? And eventually, there were many unfortunate events that happened from 70s to 80s that triggered a mass movement. At one point, mass support came for Khalistan movement because of several mistakes and blunders that happened later, in the later part of the period. All right. So Anandpur Sahib resolution would serve as the manifesto of Khalistan ideology. India would reject the demands, and by now, more resentment had crept within these extremist groups. These political religious elements, right, who were leading these struggles, they would exploit all the issues that were there. They would further carry out extensive propaganda against India to try and trigger a separatist movement against India. But what is interesting is that till 1970s, it was largely a political extremist movement. Now the question is, when did this turn into a terrorist movement? When did the violence come in? Right? How did this happen all of a sudden? In 1970s, if it was still a political extremist movement with very limited violence, how come by 1980s it became our biggest security threat? What really happened in those few years? To understand that, we need to look at the regional context. We need to look at some regional geopolitics because there is a bigger connection involved here. In 1971, India had broken Pakistan into two parts. We had played a direct role in liberating Bangladesh by aiding the liberation of Bangladesh war. This was Pakistan's most humiliating defeat, right? So Pakistan had sworn revenge against India for 1971 for breaking the country into two parts. It had given a call to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. This statement apparently was made by Pakistani leaders who had met in secret in 1974-75 to decide on a strategy to target India and destabilize India. There's a very interesting story behind this statement. It's believed that, it's widely reported that Indian intelligence agency RAW had penetrated the top layers of Pakistani military leadership, meaning we had a human asset inside the Pakistani leadership working for RAW, reporting for RAW, passing on valuable intelligence. This Indian intelligence asset, who would take part in this high profile secret meeting where the top army officials, ISI officials, the Pakistani leaders, prime ministers, presidents were present. In this meeting, a call was given, and the call that was adopted was to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. So what does this indicate? It shows that Pakistan realized conventional war is not an option against India. By now, Pakistan had fought 3 conventional wars with India and lost all of them. Right? Not once it had achieved any gains against India. It lost 47 war, 65 war was more of a stalemate, 71 was a conclusive defeat. It lost entire East Pakistan. So conventionally, India was superior any day. Pakistan realized fighting another conventional war with India is not going to serve the purpose. And also, conventional wars are expensive, as we discussed the other day. Conventional wars have a very high human cost. So you can't sustain conventional wars cannot be sustained for a longer period. Is that clear? So the call adopted was to bleed India through 1,000 cuts, meaning instead of delivering one cut through one big war, the call was to cut India 1,000 times, to attack India 1,000 times by exploiting India's internal divisions, to exploit India's internal divides, trigger conflicts, riots, attacks, and destabilize the country through a covert proxy war. This was the strategy that the Pakistani leadership adopted at this secret meeting. Right? The call for bleeding India through 1,000 cuts basically meant that Pakistan would rely on a secret war against India by using proxies to target the country. So, such a war is cheaper, the human cost is less, and such a war can be sustained for a prolonged period. Pakistan can continue to fund such a covert proxy war for decades together if it wants. And moreover, Pakistan can deny responsibility. As it is a secret war where proxies would be supported secretly, where state actors like Pakistani army, the ISI, would secretly support non-state actors such as terrorist groups to target India and destabilize India. So Pakistan can deny the responsibility. You can't directly pinpoint the blame towards Pakistan, as it would be a secret proxy war fought using proxies on behalf of Pakistani state. So this was the strategy that Pakistan adopted against India, right? Now it was waiting for an opportunity, the ideal opportunity where it could destabilize India. By this time, Pakistan had already meddled in Kashmir. It had constant interference in Kashmir. It was constantly trying to instigate a separatist war in Kashmir. It was also involved in the Northeast by now. By 1970s, Pakistan was already involved in meddling in Kashmir and the Northeast. It was backing few Northeast insurgents via East Pakistan and then later Bangladesh. Is that clear? But none of these movements would really pose a major threat to India at that point. So Pakistan was waiting for an ideal opportunity where it could cause large-scale destabilization of India. And this opportunity came up in the year 1979 in neighboring Afghanistan. Now, some of you might ask, how is Afghanistan connected to all of this? There is a direct connection. Afghanistan was invaded by the Soviet Union as part of the Cold War rivalry between US and the Soviet Union. This was the peak period of the Cold War. And Afghanistan was a neighbor of Soviet Union, right? Soviet Union feared rising American influence in Afghanistan, and to counter the American influence, Soviet troops invaded Afghanistan and toppled the government and captured the country. So, as Soviet troops occupied and invaded Afghanistan, the US saw this as an opportunity to wage its own secret war to target the Soviet Union. The US, through its intelligence agency, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, would align with the ISI of Pakistan, along with support from Saudi intelligence and European countries. All these were allies in this secret war against Soviet Union. They would align together and mobilize funds and weapons to raise the Afghan Mujahideen as a resistance against the Soviet troops. To target the occupying Soviet troops, the CIA would work with Pakistan's ISI and other allies like Saudi Arabia and European countries to radicalize the Pashtuns who are the natives of Afghanistan, the Pashtun community, would be radicalized. Pakistan, which has very good ties with Pashtun community, because Pashtuns are found in Pakistan as well, it would support the Pashtun warlords, set up radical madrasas and terror camps and terror infrastructure was established along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, with all the money and the weapons that was flowing from these countries into the hands of Pakistan's ISI. So this was the American secret war against the Soviet Union during the Cold War period by relying on Pakistan. Pakistan would play a critical role in recruiting the Pashtuns, in supporting the Pashtun warlords, and in radicalizing them to form a mujahideen, to lead an insurgent war against the occupying Soviet troops. So this pushed Afghanistan into a state of conflict. And until 1989, Afghan mujahideen would keep targeting the Soviet troops. Eventually, Soviet Union accepted defeat and retreated, thus marking the victory for the American covert war, which had given results. Eventually, Soviet Union itself collapsed and disintegrated by 1991. So in many ways, the defeat of Soviet troops in Afghanistan at the hands of Afghan mujahideen had contributed to the eventual collapse and disintegration of Soviet Union. So in a way, the US had won the Cold War. It had successfully destabilized Soviet Union by raising Afghan mujahideen with Pakistani support. So now that they won the war, right, and now that Pakistan was critical for them, they didn't care about what Pakistan was doing with all the money and the weapons. See, by this time, Pakistan had taken a call to extract revenge against India. It was waiting for a golden opportunity. In Punjab, the initial movement of Khalistan had already taken root by late 1970s. Now, all Pakistan had to do was to provide the right support to the Khalistan groups, to the Khalistan extremist groups. So Pakistan, which was gaining all the experience in covert warfare, receiving massive supplies of funds and weapons from Western countries, would conveniently divert the same weapons and funds towards backing the Khalistan outfits. Is that clear? The Pashtun warlords in Afghanistan, they would control the drug mafia, the drug cartels. Afghanistan would be a major producer of opium and other drugs. These drugs would be funneled into Punjab, and the drugs which were smuggled across the border would play a major role in raising funds for Khalistan movement and also in radicalizing the youth. In 70s and 80s, Punjab was dealing with a massive drug menace. Even today, Punjab is very badly affected by the drug problem. At one point, there was no household in Punjab where you don't find a drug addict, from youngsters to old age people. That was the kind of social problem it became. And this was carried out by some of the Khalistani groups that had been set up, which were now being backed by Pakistan. You can again see a direct connection between organized crime and terrorism. These Khalistan leaders, who were setting up different Khalistani organizations by late 1970s, they got direct shelter in Pakistan. Pakistan would provide a safe haven for Khalistan terror groups that had started taking shape by late 70s and early 80s. These terrorist leaders would be accommodated in Pakistan. They would be given a safe haven to hide in Pakistan, and Pakistan would divert funds and weapons from the Afghan war and use the same to support the Khalistan movement. So a massive pumping of drugs was carried out from Afghanistan and Pakistan to Punjab. These Khalistani extremists would enable the smuggling, the trafficking. because that would fetch revenue for them to mobilize their operations and to scale up the Khalistan movement. They could use the drugs to indoctrinate the youth, because drug addiction, right, makes a person vulnerable psychologically. One turns into a robot, a machine, if you're highly addicted to drugs, and it's easier to, you know, desensitize the youth and make them accustomed to violence and bloodshed. So many terror groups, they use the strategy, they use this tactic. They get the cadres addicted to drugs, they put them constantly on drug consumption, they get them addicted, and it becomes easier to brainwash them, to radicalize them, and to make them commit violent acts of terrorism. So these Khalistani groups would rely on drug addiction. They would get the youth addicted, they would smuggle the drugs and start trafficking it, right, which would generate a lot of funds for Khalistani groups, which helped in scaling up their operations against India. So these terror leaders, these Khalistan leaders, they would be sheltered in Pakistan by the ISI, and they would get complete support from Pakistan in establishing multiple terrorist organizations such as Babar Khalsa International, BKI, Khalistan Commando Force, Khalistan Zindabad Force, Khalistan Tiger Force, and many more. Many such terrorist outfits, they are nothing but terrorist outfits. Such terror groups were established with Punjab as their focus, with a support base in Pakistan, and as well as a support base amongst the foreign diaspora in Western countries. In countries like US, Canada, UK, France, Italy, Germany, Belgium. Across these countries, there was a significant Sikh population, right? So, around these countries, Pakistan's ISI would again play a role through its high commissions and embassies to provide backing to the Khalistani extremists. So, in a very short period of time, the movement escalated and was scaled up into an extremely dangerous terrorist movement against India. Even before India could realize the threat, these groups had become very notorious, because now they had a free supply of drugs, easy access to weapons and training. Right? The ISI was using the same infrastructure used for Afghan Mujahideen, where Afghan Mujahideen fighters were being trained in the 70s and 80s. In the same terror camps along the Afpak border, Khalistani leaders and Khalistani terrorists would also be trained. From Karachi to Lahore, Khalistani terrorists would be sheltered by the ISI and the Pakistani high commissions and embassies abroad. Right? Through the diplomatic missions, the ISI would provide direct support to the diaspora members as well who were turning towards extremism. The sacred gurudwaras were being misused for this purpose. Right? In these countries, the gurudwaras would be turned into these bases for the Khalistan extremists to operate. So, in a very short span of time, the threat really escalated, and by 1980s, we had begun witnessing massive terror attacks in Punjab, towards Delhi as well, and abroad. Within the state of Punjab, police stations would be attacked, politicians would be attacked, several ministers were assassinated, several hijackings were carried out of aircrafts, right? Then attempts were made to carry out attacks in Delhi, and few attacks started happening. Protests and violent incidents and attacks started happening in foreign countries as well against Indian missions, Indian diplomats, etc. So this is how the threat escalated very quickly, and India was staring at a massive problem. By early 1980s, Pakistan had engineered this movement. This movement, without a genuine root cause, had been scaled up and turned into a deadly terrorist movement against India. Is that clear? Even now, support amongst the masses was minimal. Majority of the Sikhs, they've always been peaceful. They don't back this ideology. Only a few sections who are misled, who are radicalized and brainwashed by these extremist leaders, by these political elements. They were the ones who were raising this movement against India. Understood? So let's take a short break right now. It's 6:50. Let's come back at 7:05. Let's come back at 7:05 and then we will continue the discussion. We have a few more points to discuss. So let's cover Khalistan movement and we'll try to cover Jammu and Kashmir as well. So come back at 7:05. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the session. So, before the break, we studied how the Khalistan movement rose, what were the root causes, how it originated and turned into a major terrorist movement against India. So, by 1980s, multiple Khalistani outfits had been formed with a strong support base in Punjab, in Pakistan, and in Western countries. Now, let's see what happened after this, because the real challenge came in the later part of 1980s. This was just the beginning. So as the Khalistan terror movement started escalating into a major threat, India obviously tried to counter the movement. Along with tackling the terror movement and trying to curb smuggling and trafficking, there was a political strategy that was employed by the Indira Gandhi government. A political strategy was employed to introduce a controversial religious figure into the Punjab's politics. Because until now, in Punjab, the politics was dominated by the Akali Dal, which was the political rival of the Congress, right? So, to counter the support to Akali Dal, Congress tried a strategy which is a very controversial strategy. It pushed a very controversial religious figure called Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale into the politics of Punjab. Because Akali Dal was eventually tied with the Khalistan movement. So the government of India thought that this would be a dual strategy. It's like hitting two birds with one stone. The government thought that if we can divide the political support in Punjab, if we can divide the political support amongst the Sikhs, it would weaken the Akali Dal and automatically it would weaken the Khalistan movement. And parallelly, it would provide electoral gains for the Congress in Punjab. So, as part of this strategy, Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was promoted and pushed into the politics of Punjab. But this turned out to be a disastrous strategy because Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was a very controversial leader, someone who could create mass following. He was a very good orator. He was someone who could easily inspire the youth and motivate the youth. But Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale himself would emerge as a leader of Khalistan movement. The strategy would backfire on India. The idea was to politically split Punjab so that if the electorate in Punjab is split, it will weaken the support for Akali Dal, the major regional party. Automatically, it would weaken support for Khalistan movement because inevitably Akali Dal leaders were involved in backing the Khalistan movement, right? So it would help in weakening Khalistan movement and reduce the political support for Akali Dal, which could politically favor the Congress to enter Punjab's politics and start winning more seats. This dual strategy backfired as Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale himself became a top Khalistan leader. He would occupy the sacred Golden Temple at Amritsar and he turned the sacred Gurudwara into a terror base. By 1983, the strategy of introducing Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale had backfired. He himself started becoming a leader of the movement and he started accumulating the terrorists at the sacred Gurudwara, that is the Golden Temple, which is the most sacred shrine in Sikhism. You can see how extremists can misuse faith. Problem is not with religion. Problem is with these extremists, these political actors who misuse faith and misinterpret faith for their own selfish interests. So by 1983, 1984, the Golden Temple had been turned into a base for these terrorists, and hundreds of terrorists had been accumulated with massive stockpile of weapons. These weapons were being infiltrated from across the border. Pakistan's ISI was pushing the weapons from across the border with the help of the Khalistan leaders who were sheltered in Pakistan. Along with smuggling drugs, massive influx of weapons was noticed, and the weapons were being amassed inside the Golden Temple. So the situation, the political and security situation, was becoming extremely volatile and dangerous day by day. And these outfits were now planning and executing bigger attacks. So, given the security situation and how Golden Temple itself had been misused by Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale and the terrorists, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi decided to carry out a military raid to target these terrorists and to flush out the militants from Golden Temple. This decision was seen as a very bold decision at that point, but would also turn out to be a very controversial decision. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi ordered Operation Blue Star. She ordered Operation Blue Star in 1984, which was led by the Indian Army commandos. The Indian Army would lead this military operation, but it turned out to be a very challenging counter-terrorist operation. Because see, this is an urban area, it's an urban setting, and engaging in combat in an urban setting is always a big challenge. That too, when you have hundreds of terrorists holed up inside the temple, holding strategic positions. They had fortified the temple complex. They had massive weaponry with them. Right? India was constantly receiving intelligence about the developments that were happening. So, as the situation was going out of control, to eliminate Bhindranwale and to flush out the terrorists from the Golden Temple, Indira Gandhi ordered Operation Blue Star. This military raid, even though the operation succeeded after several days, it would turn out to be a very controversial decision. This battle, right? It was literally a battle that took place for several days, lasting several days. Eventually, the Indian army succeeded in eliminating most of the terrorists. Many terrorists were killed. Bhindranwale himself was executed. Is that clear? Many civilians were also caught in the crossfire, and many soldiers, Indian army soldiers, also lost their lives. It was a very tragic period, but the goal of flushing out the militants was achieved. The Golden Temple was freed from terrorist occupation. But obviously, in any gun battle, there will be damage to the building as well. The sacred shrine suffered damages, and this was seen as an assault on the Sikh faith itself. Several members of the Sikh community in India and abroad, they interpreted this as an attack of a Hindu state against the Sikh minority, against their most sacred shrine. This is how the extremists carried out their propaganda following Operation Blue Star. They projected this as an attack by the Indian state, a majority Hindu Indian state against the minority Sikhs, where their sacred pilgrimage site was desecrated by the military operation. So this led to a large support coming in for the Khalistan movement. In Punjab, not just in major towns and cities, even in the rural areas, in the border areas, within the diaspora in the Western countries, large-scale support started coming in after Operation Blue Star. And following this, the Khalistan leaders gave a call to assassinate the Prime Minister. They held Prime Minister Indira Gandhi responsible for the military operation, and they gave a call to assassinate the Prime Minister herself. And eventually, as you know, her own Sikh bodyguards, right, would assassinate the sitting Prime Minister of India. And this assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in 1984 was a massive setback for India. It was a colossal intelligence failure, a major security lapse on India's part, because you cannot have your sitting prime ministers assassinated by terrorists. Her own bodyguards had been indoctrinated by Khalistan ideology, right? They saw the attack on Golden Temple. They saw Operation Blue Star as an assault on their faith, on their religion. That was the kind of propaganda that the extremists had promoted. And eventually, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated, delivering a major blow to India. In many ways, Pakistan had its revenge, because it was Indira Gandhi who was responsible primarily for breaking Pakistan into two parts in 1971. Pakistan had sworn revenge against this, and indirectly, by using proxies, right, Pakistan had got its revenge. So following this, disastrous developments started happening. Immediately after the assassination of Indira Gandhi, massive communal riots broke out against the Sikh minorities across India, especially in Delhi. Several party members were accused of aiding these targeted riots where innocent Sikhs were targeted. Is that clear? As a retaliation against the assassination of the Prime Minister, many of these party leaders, they would lead mobs, instigating them to attack the Sikh community, causing massive riots across Delhi and across the country as well. Thousands of innocent Sikhs were slaughtered, and this is one of India's most shameful events. The anti-Sikh riots. The anti-Sikh riots of 1984, with the tacit support of the state, right, would become a tragedy in India, in modern India, and it would become one of the most shameful events in India's post-independent history. It's on par with the Babri Masjid demolition and the Hindu-Muslim riots that happened later, on par with the Godhra riots that happened later. These communal riots that India has seen, they have been some of the most shameful events in India's history, and they have directly contributed to rise of extremism and terrorism. Later, we will study Jammu and Kashmir and pan-India terrorism that Pakistan has sponsored. You will see how Babri Masjid and the riots that followed, the demolition of Babri Masjid and the riots that followed, and Godhra riots, how they contributed to the rise of a support base for Pakistan and for its terror activities against India. Similarly, the anti-Sikh riots were the final nail in the coffin. Immediately after these riots, mass support came in for the Khalistan movement. Even those who wouldn't support the movement before, now they started backing the movement because they saw the atrocities that had happened. Estimates say that around 3,000 Sikhs were slaughtered. There are estimates which are indicating even higher numbers, right? Entire colonies and communities were targeted. Even women were not spared. So these disastrous riots that happened, the communal riots, created a divide between Hindus and Sikhs. It became a communal battle, and mass support came in for Khalistan movement, not just in India but abroad as well. Operation Blue Star and then anti-Sikh riots, they became the trigger points which escalated Khalistan terrorism. And these outfits, they got tremendous support following these events. Very strong anti-India sentiments took root following this devastating riots, and we started witnessing major attacks happening in India and abroad. Is that clear? So this was the most dangerous phase in the Khalistan movement, because the movement was now getting larger support. Even people who wouldn't back the movement before were now sympathizing with the movement as these riots happened, right? It had sown communal divisions in the country, and widespread support was coming in to break Punjab away from India. So Pakistan had succeeded in exploiting the social divide, the internal divides of India, and it had destabilized India through these covert operations. So at this critical juncture, the next Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, would take few decisions that would play a critical role in ending and wiping out the Khalistan movement. By 1984-85, this was our biggest security threat, because in Kashmir, insurgency militancy had not started. That would start only in 1987, 1988. Northeast insurgency had started tempering down. Naxal movement also was tempering down. So in 84-85, our biggest security threat was the Khalistan movement. At this point, especially after anti-Sikh riots, there was a moment where it appeared that Punjab might break away from India. These extremists might succeed in breaking Punjab away from India, because there was free flow of drugs and weapons happening from across the border, and India was struggling to check the trafficking and infiltration that was happening. Western countries were not cooperating, be it Canada, US, or European countries. They were not helping India. They were not supporting India. India would give enormous evidence to show that their funds and their weapons they had given to Afghan Mujahideen had found its way to Khalistan terror groups. We showed what Pakistan was doing to them. but they wouldn't care. They wouldn't be concerned because during the Cold War, India had aligned with Soviet Union. In 1971, right, during the liberation of Bangladesh war, as US became hostile to India, we had aligned with the Soviet Union, giving up our non-aligned approach. So as a result, Western countries were distant from India. Western countries weren't close to India and they wouldn't care about India's strategic interests. Despite repeated appeals from India, we even submitted evidence and intelligence reports to show how Pakistan was channeling funds and weapons from Afghanistan towards Khalistan movement. But they wouldn't act against it. They wouldn't put any pressure on Pakistan, as Pakistan was their key ally, right? And India was on the opposite side of the Cold War, aligned with Soviet Union. So this was a very difficult and challenging period for India. But from here onwards, India would take some decisive steps. The next 5 to 6 years would be crucial because by 1990s, we wiped out the movement. Now, that is a remarkable success story. In 1984-85, this was our biggest threat. Within 5 to 6 years, we had managed to wipe out the movement, and by 1995, the movement was almost dead. So, how can India achieve that success? How did India achieve that tremendous success in such a short period of time? Right? That is the next point of discussion. What was India's response? The biggest blunder from India's side was the anti-Sikh riots, not even Operation Blue Star. Operation Blue Star was a necessity, right? Backing Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale and anti-Sikh riots. Those were the blunders that India had committed. But now the time had come to retaliate. The time had come to stamp out the movement at any cost because this was not the time for political games to be played. So under Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, several steps were initiated. A multi-pronged approach was initiated at the state level, at the national level, and at the global level to target the movement and wipe out the movement. Domestically in Punjab, as there was a lot of local support and a lot of attacks were taking place, the ASPA was imposed in Punjab. Armed Forces Special Powers Act was brought into place in 1985 by declaring Punjab as a disturbed area. Until then, ASPA was implemented only in the Northeast to tackle Northeast insurgency. For the first time, ASPA was being implemented outside of Northeast India, and it was enforced in Punjab by declaring Punjab as a disturbed area under the Disturbed Areas Act. As there was a major terrorist situation with external foreign support, the time had come for India to take some decisive steps, and the controversial AFSPA was brought in by declaring Punjab as a disturbed area under Disturbed Areas Act. This would give special powers to security forces. It would give the power to even open fire, leading to the death of a person. And the security forces would have legal immunity against such killings. As it's an active conflict zone and a disturbed area where there is a direct threat to our integrity and sovereignty, security forces are given this tremendous power to open fire at will. Based on suspicion, based on intelligence, they can act. And if they believe anyone to be suspicious, posing a threat to the security of the state, they can open fire even with the aim of killing that person. All right, they need not wait for approvals, need not wait for permissions. Each police officer, each soldier who's deployed on the ground will get the special power to open fire based on suspicion, right? And this will include legal immunity to the concerned soldiers and the troops. They will not face legal prosecution without prior approvals from the government. Is that clear? Legal immunity is granted. Along with that, they can arrest, they can search property, even destroy property if needed without a warrant. Some of your basic rights will be suspended once AFSPA comes into place. fundamental rights will be compromised. Arrest can be carried out without a warrant. Properties can be searched for evidence, right, without warrant. The property can be destroyed as well in a counter-terror, counter-insurgency operation. These special powers are given, and the Punjab police was given the lead role to conduct these counter-insurgency, counter-terrorist operations. Is that clear? The Punjab police was restructured. Several high caliber officers, top officials were brought in to lead the Punjab police, and legendary IPS officers such as KPS Gill. I'm sure you would have heard about him. KPS Gill was made the DGP of the state, right? It was a strategic move as KPS Gill had a tremendous track record. Other top officials like Julio Ribeiro, another legendary IPS officer. Such key officials were brought in to give leadership to the Punjab police, and Punjab police was restructured, giving tremendous powers to the police force under AFSPA. So then began a series of counterattacks by the police. At the local level, Punjab police registered tremendous success, and they managed to wipe out the local support within 5 to 6 years. They targeted the leaders, the trafficking rings, and the lower cadres, right, who were involved in these attacks. They would be targeted and eliminated. Several killings took place, and it also gave rise to large-scale human rights violations. This is the tragedy of a conflict zone, right? On one hand, there will be terrorists committing violence and human rights violations. On the other hand, security forces, right, when they start using massive force, violations become the norm. Very serious allegations came up against Punjab police that large-scale human rights violations were being committed, including kidnapping, torture, right, and extrajudicial killings. But it was seen as a necessity at that point. And under these tremendous powers, the Punjab police, they saw tremendous success. They managed to wipe out the local support. The local support was successfully wiped out by the Punjab police. That's why KPS Gill is credited with tackling Khalistan extremism in Punjab. Almost single-handedly, he led Punjab police towards success, along with other top officials like Julio Ribeiro and the others. So, along with the Punjab police, Intelligence Bureau and BSF played a very important role, where IB would generate targeted intelligence against the Khalistan leaders. IB would run its own covert operations in coordination with Punjab police. Intelligence Bureau is responsible for domestic intelligence. So the IB started running expanded covert operations to target the local support. It would work with Punjab police and conduct its covert operations to eliminate the support and neutralize many of these terrorists. It would work with BSF, the border guarding force, to improve border security, to plug the gaps in the border, to tackle the inflow of drugs, weapons, funds, and the terrorist infiltration that was happening. Pakistan was pushing the Khalistani terrorists across the border. They would move across into Pakistan to get training and support and come back into India to carry out attacks. So enhancing border security was crucial to tackle the external support coming from Pakistan. So BSF and IB would play a critical role along with the Punjab police in eliminating the domestic threat. Border security improved. Drug trafficking, weapons smuggling was tackled quite effectively. And the local terror leaders who were involved in these attacks, who were propagating this movement, most of them were killed, many of them were arrested. And this action, police action with intelligence efforts, wiped out the movement in India. Is that clear? But of course, this alone will not end the movement. What about the external support? What about the support from Pakistan? And how about the diaspora's role in Western countries? Right? This remained a challenge for India. So to tackle the external support, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi authorized RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, to mount a series of covert operations targeted against Pakistan. See, these are highly classified operations. The government does not acknowledge them. According to the government, they never happened, they don't exist. So, how do we know about it? There are several former officials who have spoken about it, who have written enough about these operations that have happened, given some insight, and these are verifiable accounts. We had a very popular IPS officer called B. Raman, again, another top legendary IPS official. He headed the counterterrorism division at RAW when he retired from service. He spent most of his career as an intelligence officer. He was one of the top officials of RAW. He retired as the head of counterterrorism at Research and Analysis Wing. So after retirement, he has written a wonderful book called The Cowboys of RAW, named after R.N. Cow, the founder of Research and Analysis Wing, the first director of RAW. So it's named after R.N. Cow, Ramnath Cow. It's called The Cowboys of RAW. In this book, B. Raman, who was involved in these covert operations, provides great insight into the covert operations that was ordered by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. According to his account, RAW was asked to target the Pakistani link with Khalistan groups. If Pakistan could back these outfits, so could India retaliate against them and break the links between the ISI and the Khalistan outfits. So to achieve this objective, which was laid out by the Prime Minister, RAW established two covert teams, CIT-J and CIT-X. Two elite secretive teams were set up, Counterintelligence Team J and Counterintelligence Team X. Their task was to target Khalistan leaders who were hiding in Pakistan and mount tit-for-tat attacks on Pakistani soil, in Pakistani cities, for every attack on Indian soil. See, this was a different era back then. The Cold War period was a brutal period where countries wouldn't hesitate to take such covert action against each other. Right? US and Soviet Union also have done the same. So this was an era where India, Pakistan would go to any extent to protect their interests. As Pakistan was directly involved in escalating this conflict, it was essential to break the link. According to B. Raman, the strategy of India was to impose a heavy cost on Pakistan. Make this covert war expensive for Pakistan. Make it unbearable for Pakistan so that it will back out. Right? India was left with no other option because this was Pakistan's own making. It was Pakistan's own creation. So Research and Analysis Wing would mount a series of deadly covert operations deep inside Pakistan with the aim of eliminating Khalistani leaders, breaking their nexus with drug cartels, breaking their nexus with other terror groups, and tit-for-tat attacks in Pakistani cities as well, targeting Pakistani civilian population. Is that clear? Of course, you cannot write about this in your exams because these are all unconfirmed or unacknowledged operations. Government will never officially acknowledge this. But based on credible information, we can discuss this in class for your better understanding. If you don't look at this part of India's efforts, you will get only half a picture about how India tackled the Khalistan movement, right? If you just discuss the police operations and the diplomatic efforts, that's not enough. There was something else that happened which involved a secret war in Pakistan to break this link between ISI and the Khalistan outfits. So these operations went on for a few years in the late 1980s to early 1990s. And according to B. Raman, India succeeded in imposing a heavy cost on Pakistan. This covert war of India became unbearable for Pakistan at a point. It was pushed to the brink, right? India was targeting the criminal networks, the Khalistani leaders, and even the ISI links with these outfits. Plus, there were tit-for-tat attacks and bombings taking place, which increased the scale of violence in Pakistan, causing divisions inside Pakistan. So it finally pushed Pakistan to reach out to India, and it offered a mediation. ISI and RAW have a history of such secret conflicts against each other. All right. So with the mediation of Jordan, the West Asian country, the king of Jordan was a good friend of Rajiv Gandhi, and he was also a good friend of the Pakistani leader. So the Jordanian king, right, offered a neutral location in Amman, which is the capital of Jordan, where the chiefs of ISI and RAW would meet to work out a settlement, to work out a mediated settlement that both of them will back out from their covert operations targeting each other. Is that clear? This was a very successful covert operation from India. The stated goal and objective was achieved, right? The idea was to impose a cost on Pakistan and push it to the negotiating table. That is exactly what happened. The impact of RAW's covert operations was so severe that within few years, Pakistan reached out and the king of Jordan mediated between the Indian Prime Minister and the Pakistani leader. That led to a meeting, a secret meeting at Amman between the chief of ISI and RAW. And both agreed that we will back off from these operations. If ISI withdraws support, RAW will withdraw its covert operations. So this played a critical role in ending Pakistani support, at least for the time being. At least for the time being, Pakistani support came to an end. And this was the success of our covert operations in Pakistan. Next, there was another external angle, which is the diaspora in Western countries. What do you do about the diaspora in Western countries? And what about the terrorists who ran away from India and took shelter in Western countries? Within the diaspora, support had increased. Many gurudwaras abroad had been turned into a base for Khalistani outfits. In UK, in Canada, right? Many sacred gurudwaras had been misused by these terrorists and they had turned this into a terror base. They imposed a ban on Indian officials. In fact, after Operation Blue Star itself, they banned the entry of Indian officials into the gurudwaras. This has existed even till date. Recently, you might have read about a news report that Indian High Commissioner to UK was prohibited by the Khalistani extremists from entering a gurudwara in Scotland. Right? These are grave acts of provocation. It divides the government and the community as well. Right? Even when majority of the Sikh community doesn't support these events, these activities, these extremists drive a divide by carrying out such acts. So they blocked the entry of Indian officials. They would target Indian embassies, Indian high commissions and consulates, carry out protests, try to damage Indian missions, and they would even try to pressurize and target Indian diplomats. Is that clear? So no matter what India did, Western countries would not cooperate with us. We would request them for intelligence sharing and cooperation. We would urge them that these elements are dangerous. They are danger not just to India, danger to their own countries, which are hosting them. But they didn't care about Indian interests as India was on the opposite side of the Cold War. But then came a turning point. A disastrous tragedy is what woke up the West. A Air India flight, Air Kanishka, which was coming from Canada to India. Canada by then had become a hub of Khalistani terrorists. This Air India flight was bombed by Babar Khalsa International. The BKI had become a notorious terrorist outfit with support base in Canada. Now that the movement ended in India and in support ended in Pakistan as well, right? This group and even the others, the Khalistan Zindabad Force, Tiger Force, and Commando Force, they all set up base in Canada and in few other countries. The Babar Khalsa International planned a disastrous attack in 1986. It tried to bomb two Air India flights. One was coming from Canada, one was coming from Japan. Fortunately, the flight coming from Japan was saved because the bomb exploded at the airport itself in Japan. Is that clear? So those passengers, that flight was saved. There was a mishap. The bomb exploded at the airport in Japan itself, thus saving the passengers. But this flight from Canada to India, that is Air Kanishka, these terrorists successfully planted the bomb and it exploded over the Atlantic on the off the coast of UK, and all the passengers and crew were killed. More than 300 people were killed. When this happened, it was the biggest terror attack of its kind in the world. It was the biggest attack using an aircraft until 9/11 attacks. Until 2001, this was the biggest aerial terror incident that the world had witnessed. Right? And the Western countries had allowed this to happen. Canada, especially, had failed to act despite India providing enough information and intelligence. We kept urging the Canadian government to act, but it wouldn't respond. It would shelter them, it would support them. And finally, the price was paid. Majority of them who were killed were Indians and people of Indian origin. Many of them were Canadian citizens. There were few Americans and Europeans as well. So this is what pushed Western countries to finally wake up to the threat. Is that clear? So following Air Kanishka bombing, Western countries gave some support to India, and through RAW and Ministry of External Affairs, we managed to curb the support amongst the diaspora as well. The movement was not wiped out entirely, but at least it was curbed due to some help from Western countries following Air Kanishka bombing. By late 80s and early 90s, the MEA put a lot of diplomatic pressure on these governments through the diplomatic route. RAW would step up its intelligence gathering because in Western countries, on Western soil, such covert operations cannot be possible like you do in Pakistan. Pakistan is a hostile country, right? There you can go to the next level where you engage in counter violence in Pakistan. But that can't be done in Western countries, which will retaliate against India, which could affect our ties further as well, right? That would be a breach of their sovereignty. So RAW limited itself to collecting intelligence, monitoring the activities of these extremists, and using the information to bring pressure, diplomatic pressure on these governments. So these combined efforts is what gave success to India. The domestic efforts by Punjab Police, IB, and BSF, right? The improvements in border security, the imposition of AFSPA, the targeted counter-terrorist insurgency operations in Punjab, and the covert operations of IB, plus the RAW covert operations in Pakistan, and the efforts with Western countries. These combined efforts collectively helped India to bring down the Khalistan movement by 1990s. Is that clear? By early 90s, the movement almost disappeared. But however, it was not fully wiped out because such movements can never be wiped out entirely. Many elements will remain, they will run away, they'll hide somewhere else, they'll wait for an opportunity to regroup and come back. So it essentially became a dormant movement. It became a dormant movement by 1995. India had successfully tackled the threat, but we would witness a revival few years later. Understood? So this was the serious challenge posed by the Khalistan movement back in the 80s and 90s. So for 15 years, the movement had died out. There wasn't enough support either in India or abroad. But since 2010, we have noticed some very, very disturbing developments. Now, it's in this context that the topic becomes even more important for the exam. In the last 13 years, very active attempts have been noted to try and revive the dormant Khalistan movement, not just in India, but abroad as well. This time, the internet and social media have been proactively used by the Khalistani extremists who remained in Western countries, who are hiding in many foreign countries, to carry out their propaganda against India. They have targeted the diaspora youth, the youngsters amongst the Sikh diaspora. They have been the target of this indoctrination. Many of them, they don't know regarding the details of what happened in 70s and 80s. They've been fed with just propaganda material. They've been shown videos of Operation Blue Star, how Golden Temple was damaged. They've been shown videos of anti-Sikh riots, right? They've been fed with only one side of the story without showing the other side of the story. So the large-scale propaganda and indoctrination on internet social media platforms has created a support base amongst the Sikh youth within the diaspora community. And now it has spread to many countries compared to before. It's not just limited to USA, Canada, UK, Germany, France, Italy, Belgium. It has spread to many other countries as well, including Australia, New Zealand, UAE, Saudi Arabia, even Thailand and Philippines. So wherever the Sikh community is present in large numbers across these countries, Khalistan elements have regained support. They've raised their head again, and India suspects the role of Pakistan. Because see, after the Mumbai attacks, after the 26/11 Mumbai attacks of 2008, there has been tremendous international pressure on Pakistan to stop attacking Indian cities by using Lashkar-e-Toiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed. Is that clear? After the Mumbai attacks, India engaged in a coercive diplomacy. We got the support of US and European countries, and they put tremendous pressure on Pakistan to ensure that Pakistani terror groups like Lashkar and Jaish don't attack Indian civilians and Indian cities. Is that clear? This has forced Pakistan to change its strategy against India. That's why you see a pattern after 2010. After the Mumbai attacks, we don't see a major attack in India, right? Against Indian cities, against our civilian population. You don't see any major attack. Minor incidents have happened, exceptions are there. But you don't see a major attack by Lashkar or Jaish against cities and civilian population. So what Pakistan has done to evade international pressure, it has changed the tactics. It has adopted a different approach in the last 13 years. On one hand, it is targeting military bases of India by using Jaish-e-Mohammed. You can see that it has stopped using Lashkar-e-Toiba because LET was the one which carried out the Mumbai attacks. So another major attack on a city, on civilian population by Lashkar will not be tolerated. It might even result in a full-fledged India-Pakistan war. And Western countries also have made it clear they'll not tolerate such terrorism against India. So this has led Pakistan to drop using Lashkar, and instead it is using Jaish-e-Mohammed to target the military installations instead of civilian targets. Because attacks on military bases will not get you the same support from other countries. Is that clear? And the second strategy Pakistan has used is to try revive the dormant Khalistan movement. So it's not a coincidence that Khalistan movement revival started after Mumbai attacks. Both are connected. Experts believe there is a connection here. As India brought tremendous pressure on Pakistan after Mumbai attacks, there was a lot of international pressure from US and European countries. No country will tolerate another major attack by Lashkar on Indian cities, on Indian civilian population. So it's using these tactics in last 13 years to destabilize India, using Jaish-e-Mohammed for repeated attacks on military bases. That's why in last 8 years, you only see major attacks on military sites, like Gurdaspur attack in Punjab in 2014, Pathankot Air Base attack, which was carried out by Jaish-e-Mohammed, then Uri attacks of 2016, right, again by Jaish-e-Mohammed, the Pulwama attacks of 2019, again by Jaish-e-Mohammed. So all these incidents, they have a clear pattern to it. Parallelly, we have seen the revival of Khalistan activities across the world, across all these countries, including in India. Is that clear? The threat has increased exponentially in the last few years. So right now, we are facing a major challenge again, and especially in the last 1.5 years, things have escalated beyond India's tolerance level. Right? Until then, we were still dealing with it, but what has happened in the last 15 to 18 months is of great concern and serious concern. And no wonder that India has started stepping up its counter response against the Khalistan movement. Right? So let me tell you what has happened in the last few years. I'll give you some incidents to understand the impact and the scale of what is happening. Because this is before 2020. Before 2020 itself, there were many signs. All right, you guys may not be aware of this. In the United Kingdom, Britain was hosting the Cricket World Cup, the ICC World Cup. I think it was 2016 or 17, if I'm not wrong. There was a match in London at the Lords, and it was an India match. India was playing this match as well. When the match was going on, an aircraft flew over the stadium with a Khalistan flag and a Khalistan banner. And this was telecast live. The TV cameras caught this. An aircraft flew multiple times over the stadium where a Cricket World Cup match was going on, and it was carrying the Khalistan flag and banner very prominently. It was a deliberate attempt to instigate. All right. Recently in Italy, a so-called referendum was held. In northern Italy, you have a very strong Sikh diaspora community. They actually held a physical election, a so-called referendum, to vote against India. All right. There have been repeated attacks and protests against Indian missions abroad. Against Indian missions, our embassies, consulates, and high commissions have seen repeated attacks and protests. They even gave a call for a 2020 referendum on social media platforms. These extremists had given a call to hold an online referendum calling for the community to vote for Khalistan and somehow give it legitimacy to try and break Punjab away from India. Many attacks were planned in India. They were actually disrupted by our intelligence agencies. Babar Khalsa International has planned attacks in Punjab and Delhi in the last 6 to 7 years, but they've all been foiled by our security agencies. So these are very disturbing events we have noticed, and it does not end over here. In the last 1 year, organized crime related to Punjabi gangsters has become a major concern. In the last few years, many criminal gangsters have become very prominent. They wield a lot of power and influence, not just in India, not just in Punjab, but abroad as well. Several criminal cartels and gangs have come up, such as the Lawrence Bishnoi gang. He works with someone called Goldie Brar. Then you have Arsh Dalla. And similarly, there are few other gangsters who have become very notorious. They are all involved in drug smuggling. They all have some or the other connection with Khalistan outfits. They are involved in extortion. They threaten celebrities and top individuals to extort money from them. These criminal gangs have been waging gang wars against each other, right? There are many other similar groups headed by different gangsters. All right. Some of them are in jail, like Lawrence Bishnoi is in jail. He's in Tihar jail from 2014 and still is controlling the gangs from many years inside the jail. He can summon armed men in foreign countries to act on his behalf, right? So they have been running their drug cartels, their criminal rings. There is a direct link here with Khalistani outfits, and they are involved in extortion. You would have heard about the killing of Sidhu Moosewala, the popular singer, very controversial as well because of his lyrics, what he used to promote. There are many other Punjabi artists in India and abroad. Some of them are inclined with the Khalistani ideology, right? In their songs, in what they promote on social media, there is a clear inclination that's coming in. They use these symbols, right? They use these lyrics, which clearly points towards gun violence and revival of Khalistan movement. So these developments have been very notorious and very serious for India. Sidhu Moosewala had laid the foundation for a group called Waris Punjab De. When the farmers' protests had broken out against farm laws, right? The farmers' protest was an organic, genuine protest. They had a concern about the farm laws. But Khalistani elements infiltrated the protests. They derailed the protest and harmed the image of the farmers by infiltrating the protest and by trying to give it a Khalistani angle. right? Khalistani extremists in India and abroad, they tried to turn this into a Khalistani protest when it wasn't. The farmers were fighting for their basic rights. They wanted changes to happen in the farm laws. So in the backdrop of the farmers' protests, this group called Waris Punjab, they had been founded, right, to act as a organization that would support the farmers. But following the assassination of Sidhu Moosewala, Amritpal Singh, another individual, a very young guy called Amritpal Singh, who was a truck driver in West Asia. He was based out of UAE and Saudi Arabia, right? He had migrated out of India and he had found a job. He was driving a truck. So this guy would get in touch with Khalistan Tiger Force and ISI. They would reach out to him and he would become a social media star overnight. He became a prominent influencer, especially after the farmers' protests and assassination of Sidhu Moosewala. Amritpal Singh overnight, right, he emerged as a major influencer on social media platforms. And he became a self-appointed leader of Waris Punjab Day. He started speaking like Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. He started dressing up just like Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. All right, Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, the notorious Khalistani terrorist whom India assassinated in 84, right, in Operation Blue Star. He used to speak in a certain manner, dress in a certain manner. And Amritpal Singh has tried to replicate him. And according to Indian intelligence agencies, the ISI even got him a cosmetic surgery in Georgia. He was secretly taken to Georgia for a cosmetic surgery to make him look like Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale so that he can inspire more youth and masses and get mass support again. And after raising the Khalistan ideology again on social media, this guy came to India last year. He would come to India, become the self-appointed leader of Waris Punjab Day, and started the Khalistan movement, raised open calls for triggering the Khalistan movement. To free some of the Khalistan supporters who were in jail, he led a mob and attacked police stations in Punjab. Now, this is atrocious. This is a complete breakdown of law and order. Extremist elements, criminal elements attacking police stations and holding the state to ransom is unheard of, right? So this year, there were many disastrous events that happened starting from January itself. Under Amritpal Singh, Waris Punjab Day became a pro-Khalistan organization, a clear extremist organization. Many rallies and protests were held across many towns and villages. Khalistan flags started coming up. Police stations were being attacked. At Gurdaspur and at few other places, police stations again have been attacked, similar to 1980s. In Himachal Pradesh, Khalistan flags have been raised. These are very, very serious concerns for India. So then India began a crackdown. India began a crackdown targeting Amritpal Singh. Initially, India messed up the operation. The security agencies, they failed to arrest Amritpal Singh and he managed to escape. Right? This became a huge media sensation as well. Right? It happened in front of the media. The police were chasing him, but he managed to escape. For several days, he went into hiding. One of the biggest manhunts was launched by Indian security and intelligence agencies to get hold of Amritpal Singh. Many of his supporters were arrested and they were all lodged in a jail in Assam. They've been kept far away from Punjab, taken to Assam and thrown in jail. And finally, Amritpal Singh was also nabbed. He surrendered. After 1 month of hiding and running, right, he realized he had no other option. He finally surrendered. But before surrendering, he has given a call. He has addressed a gathering as well at the place where Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was his hometown. Right, he went to Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale's hometown, and there is this Gurudwara where there is a statue of Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. Their Khalistan flags are also raised. So at this place, he deliberately surrendered here and delivered a speech as well, calling for a complete uprising against India. Finally, he surrendered. He has been nabbed. He's in jail right now. So this marks the end of Waris Punjab Day, at least for now. But parallelly, the other threat we have seen is the rise of these terror outfits again. Babar Khalsa International, Khalistan Tiger Force, Khalistan Commando Force, and Zindabad Force. They've managed to become very active, leading protests and attacks against Indian missions. Is that clear? When India started the hunt for Amritpal Singh, across Punjab, internet was shut to prevent any untoward incident, right? And very strict measures were taken to apprehend all the members of Waris Punjabi, as this group was becoming an extremist and notorious organization. So, in opposition to these actions of India, these terrorist outfits abroad, they started targeting Indian missions in retaliation. As India was hunting Amritpal Singh, these terror groups mounted attacks against our consulate and embassies in Australia. The Indian mission in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, they've all been attacked and defaced. Hindu temples in Australia have been defaced, right? Rallies have been held by pro-Khalistan groups. It has even led to clashes with pro-India groups. Indians in Australia, right? They have opposed these Khalistani activities. Even Sikh community members are opposing this. They held a counter rally which led to clashes in Australia between pro-India and pro-Khalistan groups. The Indian High Commission in UK was attacked. The Indian flag was desecrated and brought down. Right? These are extremely serious events that threatens India's integrity and sovereignty. Indian consulate in San Francisco was attacked by Khalistani extremists. And in Canada, multiple rallies have been held by Khalistani outfits. Is that clear? There was a rally just few weeks back where they held a parade showcasing Indira Gandhi being assassinated. Now, how is this justified? How is this even being allowed? Right? So this is where India raises objection. We have strongly objected to this. We have protested against Canada, UK, Australia, and US for their failure to protect Indian missions and Indian diplomats. There is an increasing threat against Indian diplomats. So Canada especially poses a very difficult challenge for India because the Sikh diaspora is a vote bank. It's a major vote bank for Canadian political parties, especially Justin Trudeau, right? Even his father had a same approach. In 80s, it was Justin Trudeau's father who was the prime minister back then. Even the senior Trudeau had not cooperated with India, right? And his son is continuing the same policy right now. So in the name of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, Canada has allowed these outfits to operate, even though it knows that these are not activists, they are terrorists. There is no doubt about it. And yet Canada has allowed these activities to happen. There are a few other notorious groups that have come up more recently. The International Sikh Youth Federation. This is another dangerous terrorist outfit formed in late 80s and early 90s. Then we have Sikhs for Justice, headed by a terrorist called Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. He is based out of US and Canada, and he's been giving open calls for terrorism against India. You might have seen some of his videos as well. Gurpatwant Singh Pannu is the founder of Sikhs for Justice, right? So these terrorists have been freely operating in many countries, threatening Indian interests. So this is where the issue comes up for India. Even a few years ago, a Canadian Prime Minister was visiting India in 2018, all right? And he was bringing a delegation along with him. So in his delegation, there was one individual called Jaspal Atwal who was included by Justin Trudeau. And this guy is a convicted Khalistani terrorist. Back in 80s, he was a member of International Sikh Youth Federation, and he has been convicted in the assassination attempt of a Punjab state minister. After this terror attack, he had fled from India and taken shelter in Canada. Then he had become a successful businessman. Now the Canadian Prime Minister was bringing him as part of his official delegation with diplomatic immunity. So India would be bound to arrest him if he lands, but diplomatic immunity would prevent us from doing that. So India took offense to this. We objected to the inclusion of Jaspal Atwal in the Prime Minister's delegation as it was a major offense to India. He's a convicted Khalistani terrorist involved in a terror attack against a state minister. So back then, India downgraded the relations with Canada. We downgraded the visit, and since then our relations have been affected. Even though Canada signed an agreement to help India and assist India in counter-terrorism, it has signed a framework agreement to counter terrorism and violent extremism. Even then, Canadian intelligence agencies are not cooperating with India. They have given a free hand for these terrorists to operate in Canada, to conduct anti-India speeches and rallies, and turn the gurudwaras into bases against anti-India activities. So this is where we protest against these countries and the policies that especially Canada is following. This is largely due to Canadian politics, because many members of the Sikh diaspora who are aligned with Khalistan movement, they are very influential, right? They are part of the government itself. There are many top ministers and officials who hold a lot of influence in the Canadian government. Plus, the Sikh diaspora becomes a electoral vote bank, and political parties depend on it. So, to please them, they align with these extremists. They tolerate the extremist terrorist activities, which is harming our relations with these countries. But US, UK, Australia have committed that they will stand with India, they will work with India to take out the Khalistan extremists. Now things are different. Our relations are different with US, UK, and Australia. In the last 20 years, our ties have transformed with them. So US, UK, and Australia have promised all the possible support. Their intelligence agencies are working closely with Indian agencies. We are keeping an eye on most of the activities, and they have promised full support to India to stamp down the Khalistan movement. But Canada is the real problem. All right? And to add to this, there is another development which came up. In the last few months, many Khalistani terrorists ended up dead around the world. In Pakistan, at least 3 top Khalistani terrorists have been shot and killed. This is in the last one and a half years. In the last 1.5 years, around 3 top Khalistani terrorists wanted by India, they have been shot by unidentified gunmen in Lahore, in Karachi, and in other places. These killings have happened in Pakistan. In UK, the Khalistani terrorist who attacked the Indian High Commission, who brought down the Indian flag, he died in a hospital. Then Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the leader of Khalistan Tiger Force, who was based out of Canada, was shot and killed near a Gurudwara. All right? So these back-to-back deaths of Khalistani terrorists that happened in a short span of time. If you take the last 1.5 years, at least 5 to 6 top Khalistani terrorists have died under mysterious circumstances. So right now, after the G20 summit, Canada raised a major allegation against India, a serious allegation. Justin Trudeau brought up this issue at the G20 summit as well when he met Prime Minister Modi. But after going back from G20, he made it public, and he alleged that India's RAW had carried out these assassinations, especially the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the leader of Khalistan Tiger Force. Canada said it has intelligence received from US and the Five Eyes Alliance, which is an intelligence alliance of 5 Western democracies. They had carried out surveillance on Indian diplomats, Indian officials stationed in Canada, and apparently they have found evidence to link Indian agents with the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So this has brought back the era of 80s in a way. It has brought back doubts that maybe India is still conducting such covert operations which happened in the 80s as well, right? But we had never done it on Western soil, right? Because this would be a major breach of their sovereignty. It would have major international implications. But India as a policy doesn't do this. In the last 20 years, we don't execute such missions, such kill missions abroad. Of course, we'll never know the truth about this. We'll be in no position to comment. But India has denied all these allegations. India has outright denied these allegations and retaliated against Canada, and our relations are completely downgraded. Right? Canada, what it did was it revealed the name of India's RAW station chief. You don't do that in a friendly relationship. The raw station chiefs or any raw official who is deployed, right? Any intelligence official who is deployed in a foreign country, they operate undercover. They operate under false identities. At least the station chief's identity will be known to the host country. And the understanding is that you'll never compromise their identity because it affects their safety. But Canada triggered India by revealing the identity of the raw station chief publicly and asked him to leave immediately. Now, this puts the raw station chief under risk. He can no longer work undercover. His career as an intelligence officer comes to an end, at least with regard to foreign deployment, and it puts a target on his back. Right? If Canada is alleging that Raw is responsible for the killing of Niger, Khalistani terrorists could target this official who is an IPS officer. Right now, he's been removed from Canada. He's been asked to leave. And India retaliated by throwing out the Canadian intelligence chief in India. The chief of Canadian intelligence agency was thrown out, and we are reducing their diplomatic strength as well. Canada has suspended the free trade agreement talks that were going on, and we have scaled down many other aspects of our diplomatic relationship. So this is the widespread impact of the revival of Khalistan movement. Right? Many big developments have happened in the last few months itself. So right now, India is still dealing with the challenge. The challenge doesn't end here because other terrorists like Gurpatwant Singh Pannu is still operating in Canada, giving open calls on social media, calling for attacks against India. Recently, he released a video. He has called for an attack on the World Cup matches and even on the Prime Minister. Right? These are highly provocative. These are nothing but acts of terrorism, and Canada should not be tolerating this. But Canada refuses to accept the mistakes it has done. But US, UK, Australia have distanced themselves from Canada and they are backing India subtly. That's very evident, very clear that they will back India because they are very good strategic partners. They need India to counter China as well, right? So the geopolitical equations are different today. It was not like the Cold War period where India was isolated. Now it's different because India has risen as a major power in the last 20, 30 years. So US, UK, Australia, and others have promised support to bring down these extremists, but the problem remains to be Canada. Is that clear? So please track these developments. All right. See, let's not debate whether India assassinated Niger or not. It is controversial. Again, we'll never be able to know the truth, as I told you. Maybe 30, 40 years later, someone might give up something. Maybe if it has happened, you'll get to know. But as of now, it is all speculative. So go by what India is saying. India has no policy of such assassinations, right? We don't execute such foreign assassinations. That too not on soil of friendly countries. Pakistan is a different case. What happened in 80s is a different case. All right? That was a different era altogether. So India has denied these allegations. We have said we have no role in this. And there are experts who say that this could be because of the gang rivalry, the criminal gangs, which I was mentioning, right? There is an intense rivalry between different organized criminal gangs, between the Bishnoi gang and other gangs. So the reports say that maybe one gangster got Niger assassinated because of their inter-rivalry. But there are others who are saying India might be behind this. That's what Canada is indicating. Canada is indicating that RAW has worked with criminal gangs, especially the Bishnoi gang, to get Hardeep Singh Nijjar assassinated in Canada. So it will remain an allegation unless Canada presents the evidence publicly. It has not done that, by the way. It says it has evidence, but it has not brought it out in the public domain. If it is brought out in the public domain, maybe we'll get to know what happened. But as of now, it is all speculative. So don't dive into conspiracy theories unless and until there is something concrete. So stick to India's position that we don't carry out such assassinations. We have denied the allegation and we have retaliated against Canada for escalating this issue. Our major concern is it's not cooperating with us to target terrorists. These are well-established terrorists. They're not even activists. They're not separatists or insurgents. They are well-established terrorists. And still Canada is protecting them and shielding them. This is where India takes offense, and correctly, India has retaliated and scaled down the relations with Canada. All right. So this topic is extremely important. That's why I've spent more time on it, or else we could have wrapped it up at least 30 minutes ago. But covering the background and the current developments is very important. If not a direct question, you might get some questions in the interview. Given it's a trending topic and a challenging, complicated topic, the interview panel might test you on these lines. Especially if you give IPS, IFS as your top preferences, you are bound to face these questions, these challenging questions, right? So develop a balanced opinion, but always look at India's interests, what the government of India is saying, and don't be driven by allegations and media reports. Understood? So with this, I end my discussion on Khalistan movement. Let's see if there are any doubts, any questions. And after that, I'll just give you an introduction to the next topic. Let's look at all the questions first, and then we'll look at a small introduction to Jammu and Kashmir. And tomorrow we can pick it up and complete this tomorrow. All right, let's see the questions now. Samin is asking why military attack was not supported by Western countries. Samin, you have to be specific. Which military attack are you referring to? Kamlesh is asking, sir, what could be the major reasons for revival of Khalistan movement in recent times? See, as I told you, there are a couple of reasons. One is Pakistani support. The change in Pakistani strategy, as it's not able to use Lashkar-e-Toiba and other groups to target Indian cities and civilian population, it's using Jaish-e-Mohammed to attack military bases in Kashmir especially, and the other strategy is to revive the Khalistan movement. So there is a clear Pakistani angle, right? It has been providing funds and weapons again, along with support in foreign countries to revive these groups again against India. Apart from that, the older members of these outfits who are hiding in foreign countries, they have an opportunity right now because of the ISI support and because of the internet and social media through which they can easily spread their message, right? They're targeting the youth amongst the diaspora. They're spreading this ideology again, trying to raise this propaganda against India. So these extremists who are still hiding from 30 years, they have not given up on their agenda to create Khalistan. Is that clear? So both the factors are responsible. Plus organized crime. There is a clear connection between the rise in criminal gangsters from Punjab and their connections with Khalistani outfits. So all these factors could be playing a role. Anandu is asking, could you repeat Ross proxy war point from the Cowboys of Raw book? What did India do, sir? See, B. Raman, a former IPS official, a former intelligence officer in RAW, he has written this book called Cowboys of RAW. It's one of the most authentic accounts you get on India's intelligence operations. He says that under Rajiv Gandhi, India executed some hard hitting covert operations inside Pakistan. This was to retaliate against the Khalistan movement, to break Pakistan's links with the Khalistan outfits. So, according to B. Raman, RAW had set up two covert teams, CITJ and CITX. These covert teams would carry out operations in Pakistan. They would aim to target Khalistani leaders who are hiding in the country. They would target the drug smuggling networks, which was pushing Afghan drugs into India. They would target the links between ISI and the Khalistani terrorists, right? Which means, in a subtle way, B. Raman is telling us targeted assassinations were carried out. Maybe few ISI officials, maybe few organized criminals, drug traffickers, maybe few Khalistani leaders were assassinated by India. All right. The other role of CITX, the counterintelligence team, was to execute tit for tat attacks. For all the attacks happening in Punjab, in our cities, in our towns, there would be retaliatory attacks in Pakistani cities. I know it's very controversial. I know what I'm saying is very controversial, but it's not my opinion alone. There is enough evidence to back this theory, and B. Raman has given us enough information on this. And many former officials support this theory as well, right? Because these were officials who were involved in these operations. And it's well acknowledged unofficially that India did carry out these operations. The other operation was to impose a cost by carrying out tit for tat attacks. So this put tremendous pressure on Pakistan, and finally it reached out to India and worked out a settlement, worked out a mediated settlement, following which it reduced support for Khalistan outfits. All right. So that is what I explained about India's covert war in Pakistan. Kumkum is asking why Western countries support them. As I told you, in the Cold War period, Western countries were not friends of India, right? USA was hostile to India. So all the Western powers, they wouldn't care about India and they were all aligned with Pakistan. So since Pakistan was prioritizing the Khalistan movement as a strategy to destabilize India, Western countries wouldn't act against it. Also, in many countries, the Sikh community is very influential. There are rich businessmen, politicians, officials, and leaders. So they hold a lot of political influence in the in other countries. And the community abroad, they act as a vote bank. Their votes are crucial for political parties abroad, especially in Canada. All right, even in few other countries. So this creates a undue influence where Khalistani extremists can exploit this to get some support from those governments. If not direct support, at least indirect tolerance. See, Canada is not directly funding them. Canada wouldn't do that. Canada is not directly supporting them against India. Problem with Canada is it's tolerating them. It's allowing them to function and operate. Is that clear? So this is primarily due to the political reasons, but Canada says it's protecting fundamental rights, protecting right to expression, right to free speech. But terrorism is not right to free speech, right? And that's what Canada has to realize. Canada calls them as activists. They are not activists, they are terrorists. So Canada has to understand that difference. Finally, US, Australia, UK, others are seeing that. They are with India on this, but Canada has been the problem. Sridevi had a similar question. What will Canada gain from doing all this? As I told you, one is to please the electorate, to get votes, because the Justin Trudeau government is a weak coalition government. It depends on various other coalition partners. And one of the coalition party is headed by a Sikh diaspora member, and he has some considerable political influence. So stability of the Trudeau government is dependent on some Sikh votes. So that matters. Shravani is asking, what's the name of the pro-Khalistan group led by Sidhu Moosewala? See, when Sidhu Moosewala established the group, Waris Punjab De, it was not a pro-Khalistan group. It was a social organization meant to help the farmers and to serve other social causes. But after Moosewala's assassination, right, others took over, like Amritpal Singh, and turned Waris Punjab De into a pro-Khalistan outfit. Amit is asking, sir, how can Raw tackle Gurpantwan Singh Pannu? See, right now, India's biggest headache is this guy, the founder of Sikhs for Justice. He's an American hiding in Canada. So what India has to do is that we have to bring diplomatic pressure on them. We have to get Gurpantwan Singh Pannu arrested. He has made inflammatory speeches, right? He has given an open call, public call for terrorism against India multiple times. This is enough. This is cause enough to get them arrested in their countries. So we need to exert diplomatic pressure. We need to bring influence from US and other friendly countries and ensure that Canada acts against these terrorists. Next, Hussein is asking, please address my doubt. Why Pakistan deliberately keeps its focus to bring down India? As I told you, from the beginning, from 1947, India has been enemy number one for Pakistan, right? Starting from Kashmir dispute to the liberation of Bangladesh. Pakistan has many reasons to target India. It has always been obsessed with India, right? Especially after liberation of Bangladesh. It swore to take revenge against India. I mentioned this point again and again, right? That is the prime motivation for Pakistan. Pakistan is obsessed about Kashmir. It's obsessed about targeting and destabilizing India, as India played a direct role in breaking East Pakistan away, right? So Pakistan has made it its biggest obsession to destabilize India. That's the policy of Pakistan as well. Sulakshana is asking what strategies can be adopted to counter the terrorist environment. See, there are many steps that need to be taken to counter the Khalistan movement. One is to step up your intelligence gathering, both in India and abroad. So IB and RAW have a major task, right? Step up your domestic intelligence in Punjab and around the border areas, improve border security. Because one concern is that in the last 10, 15 years, drones are being used to smuggle drugs, weapons, and funds into India. because drones have made it very simple and very easy, right? Pakistan has been using the ISI and even criminal gangs which are operating here, organized criminal gangs. They're using drones to drop weapons, funds, and drugs on the other side of the border into Punjab. So tackling the threat, the border threat, improving border security, improving intelligence gathering, and reaching out to the Sikh community. See, Sikh community is not at war with India. Majority of the Sikhs today don't support Khalistan movement. 99% of them, they don't support it. Be it in Punjab, be it abroad, 99% of them don't back this extremist movement, right? They're all in favor of India. It's these small percentage of extremists who are causing the problems. So we have to work with the Sikh community. We have to work with the Sikh leaders, the Gurudwaras, the political parties, take their support and ensure we counter these extremists. Protect the youth from getting radicalized, right? Ensure that going forward, the Sikh youth don't fall prey to this propaganda of these extremists. So that requires collaborative effort. At any point, we should not isolate the Sikh community. The Sikh community should not feel left out or isolated or targeted. So India has to be very sensitive. That's why I'm insisting throughout the class. Sikhism is one of the most beautiful religions. Majority of them are peaceful. They don't back this movement. Even in the 80s, a lot of people did not support this. Large support came in only after anti-Sikh riots. Is that clear? But now, in this case, in 2023, 99% of them don't support the movement. It's a very small fraction of these extremists who are doing this, right? So we have to work with the community, we have to work with the religious and political leaders, and work with the diaspora, work with foreign friendly countries to tackle the threat and eliminate the threat. Aniket is asking, who are the five eyes of alliance? See, I mentioned the Five Eye Alliance, right? So there are five Western democracies that have formed an intelligence initiative. It was started during the World War period and it was scaled up after the Second World War. So there are five democracies in it: US and Canada, then UK, Australia, and New Zealand. These are the five countries that have a common intelligence gathering initiative. All right. So US and Canada, UK, then Australia and New Zealand. They can intercept all communications. The Five Eyes Alliance, it can intercept satellite communication, the whole internet traffic, every single mobile call, mobile phone call, text messages, any electronic communication can be intercepted by the Five Eyes Alliance. Kirti is asking, is Indian government taking measures for Sikh youth so that they don't join Khalistan movement? See, this is a very valid point that Kirti is raising. As of now, we don't know of any specific measures focused on the youth. The government should do that. It's high time, right? I mentioned this previously. We need to focus on the Sikh youth in India and abroad, right? If there is support existing, right, if they're getting indoctrinated on social media, there has to be some root cause. There is something that is appealing to them. We need to study this further, understand why old events are appealing to the Sikh youth today, because they have not suffered any discrimination. They have not been victims of any violence. Personally, they haven't felt any of the impact of the 80s. So today, if Sikh youth are falling prey to the ideology, even if few of them are, subscribing to the ideology in India and abroad, there must be some reason. So we need to invest efforts. That's why I told you we have to work with the community, work with the leaders, and provide opportunities for the youth to stay away from these extremists. Is that clear? So de-radicalization should be promoted. The misuse of internet, social media has to be tackled. These are very important tools in counter-terrorist strategies. All right. So guys, these are the questions. So it's already 8:30. So let's stop the discussion for today. We have had a very fruitful discussion. We have covered a very important and a trending topic, that too in complete detail. So tomorrow we will wrap up this chapter. We'll finish the terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir, terrorism seen across India, and what measures is India taking to counter terrorism. So let's try to complete this chapter tomorrow. That is the fourth class tomorrow. And then we'll start with Northeast insurgency for the fifth and sixth class. All right. These are the major topics in our syllabus. This is where we have to pay more attention because these are more complex topics. Then we'll get some easy topics like cyber crimes, money laundering. We can quickly complete them. Even though it's important, the topics are smaller. But here the topics are very big and complex as well. So that's why we have to invest more time. At least 2 classes per chapter is needed. So Naxalism is done. Linkages between development and extremism is also done. Part of terrorism is also covered. We're only left with some part of terrorism, which will wrap up tomorrow, and then Northeast insurgency. So let's end the session for today. I think it's enough. Let's catch up tomorrow and let's close this chapter. I hope you guys liked today's session. I hope you guys have understood everything. Do let me know how it went. So I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good night.